Order.
Marriage, same-sex couples bill.
Well, a warm welcome to everybody. Just before we get underway in earnest, there are a few preliminary announcements. Most importantly, members may, if they wish, remove their jackets during committee meetings. I'll be doing that shortly myself. In fact, Tim could take that jumper off, do us all a favour as well. Please, all members, ensure that mobile phones, pages, etc., are turned off or are switched to silent mode during committee meetings. I'd like to inform members that, as a general rule, I and my fellow chair do not intend to call starred amendments which have not been tabled with adequate notice. The required notice period in public bill committees is 3 working days. Therefore, amendments should be tabled by the rise of the House on Monday for consideration on Thursday, and by the rise of the House on Thursday for consideration on a Tuesday. Now, not everyone is familiar with the process of taking oral evidence in public bill committees, so it might help if I briefly explain how we will proceed. The committee will first be asked to consider the programme motion on the amendment paper, which should be in front of all of you, for which debate is limited to half an hour. We will then proceed to a motion to report written evidence, and then a motion to permit the committee to deliberate in private in advance of the oral evidence sessions, which I hope we can take formally. Assuming that the second of these motions has been agreed to, the committee will then move into private session. Once the committee has deliberated, the witnesses and members of the public will be invited back into the room, and our oral evidence session will begin. If the committee agrees to the programme motion, the committee will hear oral evidence this morning. So we begin then with the programme motion and call the Minister to move the programme motion standing in his name, Mr. Hugh Robertson.
Move formally.
So the question is the programme motion. Does anyone wish to make any comment on it? Then, as many as that have opinion, say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Now call upon the Minister to move the motion to report written evidence. Mr. Hugh Robertson.
Move formally.
Move formally. Question is the motion as on the amendment paper. May, as of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. And copies of memoranda of which the committee receives will be made available in the committee room. Now call the Minister to move the motion about deliberating in private. Hugh Robertson.
Move formally.
All those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. If we could kindly ask members of the public just to leave us for a few moments. I don't think it will be very long, and then we'll be back in and up and running. Thank you very much for your patience. fear. I look forward to it.
Fear is fine.
Is that all right? We've got the bosses here today. We've got proper people. Okay, is everyone happy? Let's get underway, and we'll finish this session at 5 to 9. Could we please call in our witnesses and the public, please? I'll ask them to say their names for the record, and then we'll come straight to you, Chris. Yes, chaos already. Sorry about this. I don't know. Good morning, Secretaries of State. Thank you very much for agreeing to come in a little bit early, but we're going to be very kind and let you go at 5 to 9, so you can hasten away to an important cabinet meeting, I'm sure. Before we ask a series of questions, I understand you might want to make a few opening comments, Secretary of State, but first would you introduce yourselves for the record?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Maria Miller, and I'm Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and also Minister for Women and Equalities.
Thank you.
And I'm Michael Gove, and I'm currently the Secretary of State for Education.
Thank you. Would either of you like to make an opening statement?
That's very kind, Mr. Chairman. What I very briefly wanted to remind the committee were some of the words that I spoke when we had the second reading earlier in the month. Marriage is a good thing, and what we're talking about in this bill and what we're proposing is extending marriage to more people, and I think it's probably very apposite that we're discussing this in the week of Valentine's Day. The bill is about fairness. It's about making sure that those who want to get married have the opportunity to do so, but also protecting the rights of those who don't agree with same-sex marriage. And a great deal of the bill is setting out the protections that we believe are important to affect that belief. All religious organisations, whether it's Jewish, Muslim, Christian or any other, will be able to decide for themselves if they want to conduct same-sex marriages, and indeed organisations such as the Church of England and the Church in Wales, who have a particularly unique position in our country because of their legal duty to on the clergy to marry parishioners, have particular provisions as well. Not to set them out as different, but to actually make sure that we can effect the same end result, which is that they enjoy the protections that other religious institutions have set out in the bill. Mr. Chairman, I've said this bill's about fairness. It's about giving the opportunity of more people to be able to get married. It's a very straightforward bill, and I hope that we can have a very constructive discussion about it this morning.
Thank you very much indeed. Does the Secretary of State for Education wish to add anything to that?
Only to associate myself 100% with my colleagues' comments.
Thank you very much. Before I call the first member to ask a question, I'd like to remind all members that questions should be limited to matters within the scope of the bill, and we must stick strictly to the timings in the programme motion the committee has agreed. I hope I don't have to interrupt mid-sentence, but I won't hesitate to do so if need be. Now, first of all, I call Mr. Chris Bryant, who has 3 short questions. Mr. Bryant.
A happy Shrove Tuesday. Pancakes for all. Just first of all, I think it's actually a slightly more complicated bill than perhaps it needs to be, really, but maybe that's because of the anxieties that the Secretary of State just referred to. Could she just explain why she hasn't consulted on extending civil partnerships to heterosexual couples? Because that was an issue. I'm not meaning brothers and sisters and everybody else, but just heterosexual couples.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, this was something that was covered in the consultation. And we obviously paid great attention to the results there because there was an indication that there was a support for such an extension. Although I have to say, I think the way the questioning was phrased in the consultation may have been somewhat complex. I take a very straightforward view on this matter, which is there a need to extend civil partnerships to heterosexual couples? There clearly is the opportunity for heterosexual couples to already be able to enjoy civil marriage or indeed marriage through a religious ceremony as well, and that affords all of the benefits that that a civil partnership would afford. I think that based on that, we don't believe that there was a need to extend civil partnership to heterosexual couples. And I think even over and above that, we believe that this bill is all about extending marriage. And, you know, that's what we believe is the gold standard. That's the thing that people aspire to, and I think that's why we really want to make sure that we focus this bill on that particular issue.
That makes my civil partnership not feel like the gold standard, which is, if I might gently suggest, the Minister might want to sort of rethink the way she talks about that. But can I get down to the sort of nitty-gritty? The government has included a small provision in relation to adultery. Could the Minister just explain why they've put anything in at all, because previously statute law has not referred to adultery, and why is she happy with this kind of bizarre anomaly where a gay man can not have adultery with another man but can with a woman?
I mean, just referring back to my previous comment, I think if we were content with the current situation, we wouldn't be extending marriage. I think by definition, we believe that it's important to extend marriage to more people. So that is why the bill is in front of us. I wouldn't want to cause any offence to the Honourable Gentleman, but that ultimately is the reason why we are doing this, and we're not content with the current situation. We believe there should be equality there. Everybody should have the ability to be able to have access to what is an internationally recognised status, marriage. But going on to the point that the Honourable Gentleman raised about adultery and whether or not, and the way this is treated within the bill, the approach that we have taken here is to recognise that whether it's adultery or consummation, that these are things that are recognised within the law. Adultery relates to heterosexual couples and will continue to deal with the relationship between heterosexual couples. It is a relevant consideration when it comes to divorce. If people want to divorce each other, they can cite adultery as a reason for doing that. We have no intention of changing that provision. What we know is available to same-sex couples who may face difficulties in their relationship and wish to consider divorce is the provision for unreasonable behaviour, which in fact many couples already use as grounds to effect a divorce, and therefore that provision will be available to same-sex couples as a very clear avenue that they can take if they wish to dissolve their relationship. I think that is a very practical way of dealing with this issue, and I think leaving adultery as something which is, you know, defined as it is in law, unchanged, is an effective way of dealing with this, given that we have provisions around unreasonable behaviour for same-sex couples to access.
How many people do cite adultery for divorce now? You may not be able to provide the precise numbers, but the numbers and the proportion would actually be helpful for the committee, I think.
I have looked at this. I haven't got the figures in front of me, but there are fewer people who cite adultery than cite unreasonable behaviour, which perhaps is understandable given...
Massively fewer or slightly fewer? Or
Can I, Mr Chairman, without... I don't want to...
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
David Burrows.
Clause 1 provides for providing when it's lawful in terms of access to marriage. How would the Secretary of State define marriage in terms of its meaning and purpose?
Well, as the Honourable Gentleman know, there's no one meaning, one definition of marriage. Already we have a situation where the state defines marriage more broadly than religious institutions do because of the ability, and that's basically as a result of the fact that some religious organisations don't have a wish to recognise divorce. So there are already differences there. I myself see marriage very simply as an ability for two people to be able to come together and stay together and pledge their commitment to stay together for life. And I think it's that sort of strength of commitment that we as a society thrive on, and that's why I support so strongly the idea of extending marriage to more people.
And is that the meaning and purpose which is the foundation of this bill?
Well, as the Honourable Gentleman will know from his legal background, the definition of marriage is something which, as I've said already, there is no one definition of marriage.
In this bill?
And in this bill, what we're doing is we are extending marriage to more people. Marriage will mean different things to different people. It will mean different things if one's getting married in a religious institution or if one's getting married through a civil registry office. And that is, I think that's the premise on which we've put forward this bill.
Yes, I'm not one to read the Daily Mail too much, but in the Daily Mail, the reference was made to emails going about between the Equalities office and the Education Department, which referred to the implications of same-sex marriage upon schools' legal responsibility to teach marriage. And apparently an email from the Equalities official warned of the possibility of walking into a minefield on this. How have both departments considered the impact on schools in relation to the bill?
As you would expect, both departments have looked carefully at the impact, not just on schools, but on public services and their provision overall. And I've had the opportunity to talk at length with the department's superb legal team, and we've also sought external legal advice as well. And we've also been helped by the public debate in which a number of eminent lawyers, not least David Panic, Lord Leicester, and Baroness Helena Kennedy, have contributed to this debate too.
Has that included John Bowers QC as well?
We haven't sought his advice, but I've read the legal opinion from Aidan O'Neill QC, which was...
John Bowers, though. John Bowers QC, who said the schools could lawfully discipline a teacher who refused to teach materials endorsing same-sex marriage.
I haven't read that advice, no, but one of the things that I think it's perfectly clear is that there would be no requirement on any teacher to promote a view or a doctrine with which they felt any discomfort. At the moment, any teacher is required, for example, in sex and relationships education, to refer to concepts like adultery and to deal with facts like divorce or abortion. It might well be the case that a teacher, Roman Catholic or strongly of another faith or none, but with clear moral convictions in these areas, if invited to express their view by a student, might express their disapproval, for example, of the termination of an unborn child or the premature termination of a marriage. But no teacher can ignore the fact that divorce is provided for in the laws of the land, or that abortion is a key reproductive right which women can deploy. So there's a key difference between denying a fact and a law of the land, and if this bill passes, then equal marriage will be a fact and a law of the land, and requiring someone to promote it. And it's on that distinction that the liberty of conscience of teachers, and indeed anyone in public service, rests.
Thank you. Ben Bradshaw.
This is for Maria Miller. Given a lot of my heterosexual friends seem to think that concepts of consummation and adultery are themselves rather antiquated, did you ever consider modernising the general marriage law in this bill, given the problems that you may well encounter as this bill goes through over these issues?
No, we look very closely at the relevance of those two concepts to extending marriage, but I didn't really feel it was appropriate to be getting into reforming those particular issues as part of the scope of this bill. I think this is obviously an issue that does generate a great deal of strong feeling on both sides, and I think trying to really keep it very much focused on extending marriage was our objective from the start.
Tim Loughton.
Thank you, Chairman. The Culture Secretary just said that she thought the definition of a marriage was the ability of two people to come together and commit together for life. Why is that not already catered for under civil partnerships, and at what stage, as she said that the government were not content with the current situation, at what stage did the government become not content with the situation, and why? And then can I have a follow-up?
So I think the honourable gentleman will know that the contract for Equalities back in May 2010, at the time of the general election, very clearly indicated that we would look at this area with a view to considering whether there was need for reform. And I think following on from that, so I think that showed very early on, indeed prior to the formation of the coalition government, that there was an intention to consider this area very closely. And then my predecessor, the Home Secretary, subsequent to that, did a great deal of work, both talking to religious organisations, but also then undertaking one of the, or in fact the largest public consultation that any government has ever undertaken last year. Was announced just over a year ago and then continued through 2012. Really, I think it took a great deal of time to make sure that people were aware of the government's position and then ask people their thoughts on how that might be implemented. So I think really since the beginning of the coalition government there's been clarity about certainly our lack of contentedness in this area. In terms of the first part of your question, in terms of it was about strengthening marriage. I've written down, Mr. Lawton. Sorry.
It was your definition of marriage, which was the ability of two people to come together and commit together in public for life. Why can't they do that already under civil partnerships, and at what stage? Which goes back to the original question, and just saying that the document Contract for Equality, which apparently came out 3 days before the election, of which I think most Conservative MPs were blissfully unaware, let alone the public at large, isn't a reason for at what stage and why the now government has become discontent with the nature of marriage. So what I wanted to know is what happened between the government and the previous government saying that civil partnerships in 2004 absolutely achieved what we all agreed we needed to achieve, and then something apparently happened 3 days before the election, and more recently for this legislation now to come in, because under your definition of marriage there was no need for it.
I'm not sure it's for me to answer for the decisions made by the previous government on civil partnership. I think I've already set out quite clearly that this was always the intention of the Conservative Party to consider this. Certainly I can remember sitting down and reading the Contract for Equalities
you had time
very, very closely. And, I think that, over the last 2.5 years, there's been, I think, a great clarity about how the government wanted to move forward on this. And I think now with the bill in front of us, that's coming to fruition. And, it doesn't feel like a process that's lacked transparency when more than 250,000 people have been participating in it. And so I hope I can reassure Mr. Lawton on that. In terms of the, does civil partnership offer the same thing as marriage? I just think that it's very important as a society that we recognise the importance of dealing with people equally. And marriage is something that's at the moment only open to some couples, not all couples. And as a government, and I think as a society anyway, we want to be fair, we want to treat people fairly, and giving people access, same-sex couples, access to marriage as well as civil partnership is a question of fairness. I do not personally believe that we should be nurturing a two-track approach to this. I think that it's important that we have a strong institution called marriage, and we should be strengthening that. We have decided, Mr. Streeter, just for the sake of completeness, because I know this is an issue the committee has, or the second reading considered, we did look very closely at whether we should be continuing the availability of civil partnerships for same-sex couples, and we came to the conclusion that we should do that. And really for a very, very important reason is that there may well be same-sex couples who, for religious reasons, decide that marriage is not something that they wish to opt into. And I think this was expressed during the second reading debate. And therefore it would be very wrong to deny those individuals the ability to formalise their relationship through a civil partnership. So that is the reason, I think very logical reason, why we've decided to leave that in place. But we will obviously continue to look at that as we move forward.
I'm not entirely sure that answers my question as what happened 3 days before the election and now. However, on the question of fairness, which you come back to several times as your justification for this legislation, how is it fair that a same-sex couple who happen to be Anglicans and church attenders, who have been in a stable relationship for many years, may have had a civil partnership, how is it fair that they will not be able to get married in their church?
I don't think it's really for the state to start to tell religious institutions what to do.
But that's what we are with the Church of England in its legislation, aren't we?
With respect, it isn't what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is to give religious institutions the option to follow their beliefs, follow their conscience on these issues. We know that there are religious institutions, whether it's the Unitarians or the Quakers or others, who wish to opt into being able to conduct same-sex marriage. They see it as a way of strengthening, taking their faith out to a broader community. I think that's an interesting view and something that I would applaud. But equally, there are churches who don't wish to take that approach at all. And what we have done within the bill is given those organisations the ability to be able to opt in if they wish to, or not if they don't. And I think that's a very important point for the committee to understand. There is no bar on any organisation from being able to opt into undertaking same-sex marriage. It is really down to the organisation themselves.
Thank you. Kate Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Streeter. My first question is to the Secretary of State for Education, and I'd like to pursue a little more the protections for teachers, because I think there has been a lot of public anxiety expressed about this. My understanding is that teachers are required to teach about the nature and importance of marriage. I think that's the Education Act provision. And it seems to me, if they are teaching about the nature and importance of marriage, and this bill passes, as I hope it will, implicitly they are going to have to acknowledge that same-sex marriage is valid, and that whether that's contrary to their religious beliefs or not. So what protection is there in that situation for the teacher that the Secretary of State described a moment ago, I think, Mr. Streeter, a teacher who then says, I'm teaching that this is very important, but actually I don't believe it?
The first thing is that the language that you referred to exists in the statutory guidance that was issued in 2000 when David Blunkett was Secretary of State for Education. And that statutory guidance hasn't changed, and I see no reason to change it. There is a difference between acknowledging the importance, both historic and current, of an institution like marriage, and also acknowledging how it's changed over time and how it's brought within its ambit different people in different ways, and then inviting someone to endorse a moral view which they do not share. And the difference is the difference which I think all teachers understand between teaching facts, introducing students to knowledge, and at the same time expressing an opinion. We wouldn't expect teachers in any area to express strong or polemical opinions. In fact, there is legislation to ensure that overall, when teachers are presenting anything that is political, that they ensure that children have access to a balanced view on the matter. But any teacher, if asked direct or invited to share his view by a parent or a student, is perfectly at liberty to say, with gay marriage, equal marriage, as with adultery, as with divorce, as with abortion, what their own moral view might be.
I'm concerned that a school may have a policy and a teacher may be required to follow it, but there is no Ofsted inspection of PHSE, is there? So we won't know or be able to validate the way in which schools are approaching this. Is there any concern in the department about what teachers might be doing in schools and saying, and how we will know what's going on?
Well, it is, I suppose, there could be two concerns on either side of the spectrum. There could be a concern from people who, because of strong religious faith, fear that children are being taught things about sex and relationships that they might consider to be too permissive, for want of a better word, and indeed the opposite concern, that some people might think that a particularly traditional, for want of a better word, teacher might be presenting a moral worldview that was at odds with the view that they held as parents. There are several protections that parents have. The first protection is that there is an absolute right to withdraw children from sex and relationships education on the part of any parent. The only exception to that is the national curriculum content in biology that refers basically to the birds and the bees, the mechanics of reproduction. So if any parent had the slightest concern, then they could withdraw their child. Of course, it's the case that prior to that, there's an expectation that any parent would raise any concerns that they had with a teacher or with a head teacher. But as well as those protections which exist, and of course the Article 9 protection which exists for any teacher to safeguard their freedom of thought and conscience, there's another thing which I think it's important to bear in mind as well, which is common sense. We expect teachers, particularly, but not exclusively in secondary schools, to navigate their way through all manner of potentially contentious areas, whether it's citizenship or history, whether it's parts of PSHE or SRE. There are all sorts of tough questions that young minds face as they grow up. Part of the approach that we take is to respect the professionalism of teachers and to respect the way in which head teachers operate. By definition, there is no way that we can turn our schools into Orwellian institutions in which a central inspector can be aware of every word that is uttered by every teacher at every time. But it seems to me to be curious to imagine that on this issue, as distinct from any others, that teachers will somehow collectively take leave of their senses and their obligation to young minds and seek to turn themselves into either latter-day Torquemadas or anything else.
Nelson?
Thank you. Obviously, lots of people who wrote to us wrote about sort of provision of services, that sort of area. So I just wonder if Secretary of State, you could talk a little bit about those people, the hotelier, the famous B&B owner, those sorts of examples, perhaps of strong Catholic views. Just talk a bit about how they would be impacted by this and your expectations of them under current legislation.
Well, Mr. Chairman, obviously this bill deals particularly with marriage and with extending marriage in a civil sense to more people. So it directly doesn't impact on those people who are providing services such as Ms. Allison suggests. But clearly, as we all know, this is something that has been raised as a spectre. I think particularly perhaps those that might be offering marriage ceremonies within their premises. Yeah. And I know one particular example was cited where perhaps somebody with a very strong religious faith who runs a hotel, who may be offering a civil marriage within their rooms and within their premises, would be concerned about how this would impact on them. I think what I would do is draw the attention of the committee to the fact that actually those individuals already have an obligation to offer civil partnerships. It's part of their licence, and therefore actually they would be in breach of their duties if they were to refuse same-sex civil partnerships already. So really, those individuals probably have had to take that decision already, that they're happy to undertake same-sex civil partnerships on their premises. And I think the most telling thing, Mr. Streeter, is I'm not aware that there have been any problems in this area, or indeed that there have been any sort of breaches of duties in that respect. So I although I understand entirely this particularly theoretical concern, I think it's a theoretical concern, and in practice doesn't seem to be creating the problems that perhaps people might be worried about.
If I may, Mr. Streeter, one follow-up on that, and a quick question to the Secretary of State for Education. So, I mean, people in public services, people in jobs, what provision for conscientious objection, these are the sorts of things that many of us, obviously, people wrote in about. Can you just sort of give them some idea about that? Yeah. Well, there is, and you're absolutely right to raise the issue of people with strong religious beliefs, particularly whether it's providing services or indeed in the public sector, have, I think, a very clear ability to demonstrate their faith at work. And I noted that some of the recent rulings coming out of the European Court of Human Rights really affirmed the Prime Minister's really strongly held belief that people should be able to wear a cross at work as long as there's no health and safety reasons why they wouldn't do that. And I do think people should be able to profess their faith in an appropriate way in a work setting. But there is always this the reality that we have to do that in a way which doesn't discriminate against other people. The right to be able to assert your belief cannot be at the cost of another individual being able to
be provided with services, and that's going back to perhaps the bed and breakfast case, and most recently in the case of civil registrars having to very carefully balance their religious beliefs with their public duty to provide civil marriages for or civil partnerships at the moment for individuals of same sex. And I think what the European Court of Human Rights rulings have shown is that actually we've got the balance right at the moment. So that was, I think, a good thing to see coming out of the courts recently.
Thank you. And just a quick question to Mr. Gove. There's obviously a very considerable level of homophobic bullying still in schools throughout the UK. So would you've described the balances, the difficult balancing act that teachers have to strike, but would you, whatever their views on same-sex marriage, expect them to offer appropriate support to any child that was suffering homophobic bullying?
Absolutely. It's striking that some of the schools which are best in dealing with bullying of all kinds, including homophobic bullying, include faith schools. The evidence is actually, though, in the playground, that there are new ways in which bullying is being directed towards some students, and homophobic bullying is a feature of that. It is a growing problem in some playgrounds.
Thank you. Jonathan Reynolds.
Some of the evidence to the consultation urged the government to take on this opportunity to equalise pension provision for same-sex married couples, civil partners and widowers with the benefits currently enjoyed by widows. Why is the government not taking this opportunity to do that?
Well, I think, as the committee will already know, is that we've done a great deal to try and equalise pension provisions in this country. And the vast majority of cases, men, women and civil partners and same-sex married partners are treated equally. There are issues around the state pension, particularly for individuals who are over the age of 63, and we took a decision, and I think really, particularly given the very difficult economic times that we're in, that equalising the anomaly that particularly affects that group of people, the cost would be around £80 million, is that something that we didn't feel would provide enough benefit for the amount of money that was being paid out, and that we'd be paying disproportionately and potentially actually not always hitting the right target.
Thank you for that figure. That was going to be my supplementary question. Can I ask you what work the government did looking at the impact on occupational pensions and the benefits enjoyed by people from those?
Yes, we've looked at this in some detail. The issue, as the Honourable Gentleman knows, is reasonably complex. For occupational pensions, same-sex married couples will be treated the same as civil partners. And the right to pension benefits for their survivors will be based on rights accrued since 2005, when the Civil Partnership Act came into force. That was something which honourable members here who were on that bill committee will remember was a particular point of debate at that point in time. But I think the important thing to say here, and I think this is really interesting, is that the majority of occupational pension schemes actually exceed the minimum requirement at the moment, and I think that's something to be applauded, and I hope the committee will be urging more occupational pension schemes to take this approach, so that civil partnership pensions on sort of rights are actually more than they would have to be based on the law. I think that shows goodwill on those organisations, and let's urge them to be doing even more.
Thank you, Chair.
Stephen Williams, followed by Ben Bradshaw.
This is a question for Maria Miller. Coming back to the position of the Church of England and the Church in Wales about this duty to marry parishioners who wish to get married either in their local parish church or nearby parish church, why didn't you consider removing this obstacle from the other end, so to speak, by removing that common law right for someone to be able to marry in a parish church if they wish to?
Because we didn't feel that it was necessary to do that. We could affect the end that we wanted to, which is to give organisations like the Church of England the choice whether to opt in or not, by simply not extending that common law duty. I think that is a more positive way of achieving the same ends.
Wouldn't removing that common law duty actually remove the major problem with this bill, as seen by a lot of religious organisations that they need protection under the bill, whereas the only reason they need protection is because of that common law expectation in the first place.
No, well, there was no desire from the Church of England or the Church in Wales for that to happen.
If I were a Church of England priest and I had a gay or lesbian couple in my congregation, I wouldn't be allowed to marry them in my church under this legislation, but would I be allowed to officiate at a ceremony at a Quakers meeting house or one of the other churches that are going to be offering marriage?
I think this is very much something for perhaps you would want to talk to the Church of England about. I've considered that very carefully, and my interpretation of their rules, and it would be my interpretation of their rules, would be that a priest within the Church of England officiating at a ceremony in another church in their official capacity may well put them in breach of their obligations to the Church of England. As I say, that's something which you may want to question the Church of England more about. Each religious institution in this country has got its own different ways of dealing with marriage. And in the Church of England, you are a vicar who is able to practice within that church and also within the premises of that church. If you are given a dispensation to go into a Quaker church to practice, our interpretation would be that that would potentially be in breach of Church of England's regulations.
Thank you.
Burrows?
Let's move forward a year. We're in the month of celebrating Lesbian and Gay History Month, and there's a teacher who quite rightly will stick to the law and say that same-sex marriage exists, but wants to put forward her view that she doesn't in good conscience believe that it's equivalent to her traditional marriage view. Will she be fully protected in asserting that view? And then in terms of the fact that the Lesbian and Gay History Month will go across the curriculum, teaching children about the value of same-sex marriage, will there be the opportunity for parents to withdraw their children, not just from sex education, but other classes?
The first thing is, again, the Article 9 rights of any individual are not affected by this legislation. Any individual has perfect liberty of conscience and freedom of expression. The question would arise if any teacher on any subject chose to go beyond the bounds of what we would consider to be reasonable behaviour for that teacher. So if a teacher in the course of history or any other subject were to advance a view that were unbalanced and which might lead any member of the class to think that they were being subject to inappropriate teaching, or any parent to think that they were subject to inappropriate teaching, then of course there'd be an opportunity for that parent or that individual to raise the issue with the teacher or with the school. But I have to say that I can't see what the concern is here, because by definition, if you express a view reasonably and you explain what your own position is, then there is no problem on any issue. And if you express a view which is unreasonable, or you abuse the opportunity to be in charge of young minds on any issue, then that could obviously become a question for the school leader. But I think the desire to suggest that this legislative change changes the position of teachers perplexes me.
Chris Bryant.
Secretary of State for Culture, I just want to ask about anomalies, because we will end up with a lot of anomalies at the end of all of this if the bill goes through exactly as it is. One was referred to, or we got close to it just now, which is that if you want to get married, if you are a religious person and you're a same-sex couple, or you are a religious couple and you same-sex, you can have religious symbols at the hotel when your civil partnership is being celebrated. But if you're a heterosexual couple, using exactly the same venue, using exactly the same registrar, and having a marriage, you will not be allowed to use religious symbols. And for that matter, a same-sex marriage will not be allowed to use religious symbols. Aren't we just in danger of creating an awful lot of anomalies?
I don't believe so. We very simply saying that individuals, institutions, so religious organisations are able to choose whether or not they opt into this measure. We're saying that there is an ability for people who are currently offering marriage and civil partnerships on their premises to extend that to same-sex marriages. I don't believe we're making it as complicated as the Honourable Gentleman's talking about. Maybe he can explain his point more so I could answer it more.
Just very, very briefly, where you deal with religions, which by definition are collective expressions of belief, then there are anomalies. It is the case that the Roman Catholic Church would not allow either of us to take part in Mass, but the Church of England allows any member of any church with which it's in communion to take communion.
Okay, we're moving on.
No, it doesn't.
Colleagues, 7 minutes left. Tim Loughton.
Quite wrong.
Tim Loughton, please ask a question.
One quick question to each. The Secretary for Culture said in the second reading debate that she intended to see Northern Ireland brought into the remit of this legislation. How does she intend to do that, given the situation with devolution at the moment and the vote recently in Northern Ireland?
My reference was to make sure that we had an accommodation which recognised equal marriage in this country, in England and Wales, in Northern Ireland. That's what I was referring to.
So how are you going to achieve that?
We will achieve it in the same way as we do with many other issues which are devolved. We seek a legislative consent motion. I have already been in communication with the Northern Ireland government to seek such a motion, knowing that their position is that they would not be seeking to extend marriage in the way that we are in England and Wales, and indeed I believe the way that they intend to extend in Scotland as well, in their part of the United Kingdom.
I'd like to return to the pension issue. I've been contacted by a trans couple. They're pleased that under this legislation they'll be able to remain married. They're married currently. They're pleased that they'll be able to remain married with one member of the couple changing into their new affirmed gender. But in making that transition and becoming a same-sex married couple, then one partner will lose the pension rights. Has there been any consideration given to that anomaly, and what sort of decision would that couple really be faced with? Isn't that rather unfair to them?
Right. We have, as with all pensions issues, looked to be as fair as it is possible to be. I think this is a particularly difficult area. If we made an exception for private and occupational pension schemes where a person changed legal gender, then this would place additional regulatory and administrative burdens on to pension schemes. And it would also require schemes to ask survivors, I think, intrusive questions to establish the gender history of the deceased, and therefore be able to evaluate what the appropriate survivor benefits were. So it's a very, very difficult and complex area that we've looked at in some detail. We have decided that it's best to avoid over-regulation and allow schemes to be flexible in the way that they provide these benefits. And some schemes can and do provide more than the minimum, as I've said before. We're making sort of an exception in this area for state pensions, because otherwise a married woman's pension in payment could be reduced when her marriage becomes same-sex. And this could happen if her spouse was born particularly before April 1950. That's the particular area. So we have tried to put in place an approach which will give as much equity as it can. But clearly I'm very interested to hear in the discussions of this committee whether you feel there are further improvements that can be made. We've tried to work within the existing framework as much as we're able to, but clearly ministers will be interested to hear any further thoughts on that area.
Tim Loughton, then Ben Bradshaw will have the final question. Tim Loughton.
The Education Secretary keeps referring to inappropriate teaching being a trigger point for some action taken against a teacher who had a problem teaching about same-sex marriage. The recent cases in the ECHR referred to a registrar and a relate counsellor who felt it would be inappropriate and they would be unable to carry on that in that work. But that was not upheld and they were effectively sacked. So if a teacher said in a Catholic school, for example, that he or she was unable to take an RE lesson, because you don't have to be an RE teacher, or a sex and relationship education lesson, unless he or she could refer to same-sex marriage as, for example, a pretend marriage, would that be inappropriate teaching, and what would the repercussions of that be?
Why would a teacher want to go into the lesson with that aim in view?
If a teacher holds to the view that they did not agree with same-sex marriage, of which there are many teachers, as a recent survey has shown, that teacher is perfectly happy to teach religious education or sex and relationship education, but he or she would not be able to include teaching about same-sex marriage without explaining his or her view, the conscience that you've referred to, as not being a real marriage, a pretend marriage, for example. On that basis, would she or he be allowed to take that lesson or not?
I don't know any teachers who would think, you know what, in the next hour as we discuss whatever it might be, I think my most important aim in the 60 minutes available to me with these young people is to explain why I think that this is a pretend marriage.
That's not the question.
Well, that's my answer.
That's the answer. Ben Bradshaw has the final question.
Answer the
Maria
question
Miller, how much is it going to cost to convert a civil partnership to a marriage?
You're absolutely right that there's provisions within the bill for us to be able to do that. We haven't got a cost worked out yet. It will be dependent on the cost to the Treasury, cost to people who are absolutely implementing this. Do you have
an approximate idea?
I don't have an approximate idea at the moment.
Colleagues, we've now reached more or less the time that we had said that we would allow our Secretary of State to go. Thank you very much indeed for your evidence. We wish you well in making wise decisions this morning at Cabinet, and thank you for coming to see us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I meant that most seriously. We're now hearing evidence from the Church of England and invite our new witnesses to step forward. Once more into the breach. Well, gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for coming to give evidence before us today. Could you kindly introduce yourselves for the record?
I'm the Right Reverend Graham James, the Bishop of Norwich.
William Fittall, Secretary General of the General Synod of the Church of England.
Alexander McGregor, Deputy Legal Advisor to the General Synod and the Archbishops' Counsel.
And would you like to make a brief opening statement, or should we go straight to questions?
I'll happily make just a brief statement. That the Church of England's understanding of marriage is rather unambiguously set out in Canon B30, as many of you will be aware, where it said, according to Christ's teaching, marriage is the union of one man and one woman for life, to the exclusion of all others. And since canon law is part of the law of the land, clearly there's been a need for the sort of legislation before us which acknowledges the two understandings of marriage, one which will be gender neutral and one which will be more traditional. And our concern, I think, has not been simply to ensure rights and freedoms for the Church of England, but it's a concern for the good of marriage itself. I mean, as the Secretary of State said earlier, she believed marriage was a good institution in society, so do we. And we've been grateful for the way in which the government has worked with us in shaping this bill before us. And overall, we are broadly content with the way it's developed, although there's more work to be done. I think our regret, of course, is that until now there's been a single understanding of marriage across church and state and between the world faiths. We regret there won't be the same unanimity, and we think that there may well be consequences for this which none of us have fully identified as yet.
Thank you very much. Chris Bryant.
Is homosexuality curable?
Who you are?
I don't.
Within the scope of the bill. Let's have a very brief response, and then we'll come back to the bill.
I do not think myself it is. There are Christians who believe it to be curable, but that's not the view that I take.
Because, well, Chair, without your cynicism, it does actually strike to the matter of the bill, and in particular the Church of England, because the Book of Common Prayer of 1662 laid down 3 reasons for marriage. First of all, procreation. Obviously doesn't apply to many who get married because they either have no intention or have no ability to have children, and we don't consider them not to be proper marriages. Secondly, to prevent fornication. That remedy is written in the language of 1662 and a particular understanding. But thirdly, for mutual society. And the bit I don't understand about the Church of England's position is why, and that's reaffirmed in the 1928 prayer book, not passed by Parliament but passed by the Church of England. What I don't understand is if you don't believe that homosexuality is a moral disorder, or you don't believe that it's incurable, why you would be opposed to homosexual couples being able to have that mutual society.
Bishop?
I think the mutual society help and comfort one may have of the other is affordable in civil partnerships. When the Church of England marries someone, the preface in the Book of Common Prayer is recited even when the couple are past, or the woman is past childbearing age. There is a distinction between idealism in relation to what the purposes are for marriage and realism about the couple who stand before you. So I've married a couple who are both in their 80s, and I've said first, the purpose of marriage is for the procreation of children, and they've understood it. It doesn't apply in its fullness, obviously, to them, but it is a purpose for which marriage exists.
But do you understand why people would then think, if the Church of England had campaigned aggressively or assertively or voluntarily for civil partnerships, then you might have a bit more to say on this subject?
I can understand why you think that. You're speaking to somebody who voted against the Wrecking Amendment in the House of Lords, which tried to prevent civil partnerships being brought on the statute book in the way they have, and there were a number of us who did so.
Stephen Williams.
Coming back to this common law duty to marry, as I understand it, a parishioner could turn up at a parish church and one of your vicars in Norfolk would marry them if they were divorced, and indeed if both parties were divorced, or even if they were atheists, not even professing Christians. Is that the case? If they were atheists, they don't have to prove that they are adherents of the Church of England.
No, they need to be residents of their parish or have a connection with the parish. Yes.
So a vicar in one of your parishes would marry a double divorced couple who could be atheists but would deny that right to committed Christians.
He's unlikely to do that with those who are divorced if he'd adhered to the House of Bishops guidelines on the further marriage of the divorced in church.
The question I posed to Maria Miller about what would happen to a priest who wanted to give pastoral support to a gay or lesbian couple in his or her parish, wasn't allowed to but wanted to officiate at a ceremony at a Quaker's meeting house.
Well, he would have trouble, I think, officiating at a ceremony at a Quaker meeting house, since there aren't officiants at
or
a Quaker
else.
marriage. But I recognise the point. I think, in the first place, I mean, I don't think we've discussed this in the Church of England. Obviously, we haven't. You'd need to be recognised and regarded in another denomination to operate. He or she might need to be recognised as a civil registrar to undertake that function. Whether or not that would be an offence against the canons of the Church of England, I think I'd need to ponder and think about. Obviously, within the Church as it is at the moment, there are possibilities of Church of England clergy presiding at marriages in nonconformist churches if they are recognised and regarded, I think, under the ecumenical canons. But I'd need to go back and look at that, and we could write to you with a much more informed answer.
Thank you. If either two other witnesses want to chip in any time, please feel free to do so. Stephen Gilbert.
Thank you very much. One quick question and then a main question. Do you accept that there are other views within the Church, both with vicars in different parishes and different places, that the Church of England does not have one stable view across the country shared by every member of the Church?
The Church of England has doctrine which is expressed in its canons, which it believes to be consistent across time and consistent with the teaching of Jesus Christ. I think I've been ordained long enough in the Church of England to know that unanimity of view on anything in the Church of England is impossible to find on this as on everything else. So, no, certainly there is no unanimity of view, but there is a distinction between the doctrine of the Church of England and what people who belong to the Church of England think.
I appreciate
and one of the glories of the Church of England is that we recognise conscientious dissent. I mean, there is a right of conscience, and we welcome couples who've registered a civil partnership, who may not agree with the Church of England's doctrine, to the Eucharist, and to be fully part of the body of Christ.
On to my main point, which is about humility. I was very lucky to go to a Church of England primary school. One of the lessons that struck me there was about humility and questioning whether you might be wrong, even in the strongly held views that you have. And it strikes me that if the government is wrong in bringing forward this equal marriage bill, then the worst that will happen upon the married couple's deaths, that God won't recognise those marriages. It strikes me that if you're wrong, the worst that will happen is that people will be perpetuated in a discrimination that on their deaths God says was unjust. Have you ever considered the possibility that you might be wrong?
I think one of the characteristics of Christian life must be to always think that you may be wrong. And that's true on every side of this debate as on every other. And if there wasn't Christian humility in all of our churches, and pray God in Parliament too, we would all be the most to be pitied.
Thank you very much. Jonathan Reynolds.
If this bill is passed, same-sex couples will have the choice of a marriage or a civil partnership. Heterosexual couples will just have no choice, there'll be marriage. Do you believe civil partnerships should be extended to heterosexual couples?
Well, the Church of England, I'm here, I think, supposedly speaking on behalf of this variegated body, the Church of England. The Church of England doesn't have any official position on equal civil partnerships, but I can tell you from my own point of view, it seems to me a strange anomaly that heterosexual couples cannot register a civil partnership. I mean, you've only got to look at the figures for marriages. There are now 100,000 fewer marriages in this country than there were 20 years ago each year. The figures are quite striking, and that's given the much greater acceptance of remarriage after divorce. And a great many people, a great many heterosexual couples decide not to get married, and they do so conscientiously. It's not an accident. But it may well be that heterosexual civil partnerships might fulfil a need for them. That's not something over which the Church of England generally would have an opinion, but I can understand within this context why you might argue that. I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm talking all the time. I must bring in William and Dilly.
Two quick questions. Just as the son of the Church of England vicar who would certainly agree with the variation of the various views across the entire church. Anyway, 2 points, and I think there's a really important point that Ben Bradshaw, I just want to extend to that, because I know this is going to happen. Indeed, I've got a vicar in my own constituency who I'm sure would like this to happen. If after this legislation goes through, a Church of England licensed vicar does perform a wedding of a same-sex couple on licensed premises, be it Quaker or otherwise, within that parish, will that marriage be illegal after it's happened? Does it therefore effectively have to be annulled by the church? How exactly is it going to happen?
I think I'll pass that to the lawyer who might give a proper answer.
The bill, as you know, doesn't extend to marriages according to the rights of the Church of England. So the marriage simply couldn't take place as a lawfully effective marriage using the rights of the Church of England. But I think the scenario you have put forward is where a clergyman or a clergywoman of the Church of England went to another denomination and did some work there. that doesn't seem likely to arise. The general principle of ecclesiastical law is that the clergy of the Church of England can only use Church of England rites, only use Church of England forms of services. That's the basic position. There's a special exception for that in relation to churches with which we have formal ecumenical relations. But as far as I'm aware, none of the churches that we have formal ecumenical relations with are proposing to opt into same-sex marriage.
But on a civil premises, if he did it in a hotel?
Well, as far as I'm aware, no clergy of the Church of England are employed by local authorities as marriage registrars.
What I'm trying to get to is, at what point does it become a non-marriage? Because all this could happen. A Church of England vicar could go to a hotel. There could be an organist. There could be all the trappings of what might have happened in the church. He performs the ceremony. The couple say, "Right, we're now married." What then happens?
In hotels, they can only be civil ceremonies.
The Church of England is excluded from performing any ceremony under the law that extended civil marriages to registered premises.
But I just wonder at what point it becomes a non-marriage, because it's being performed by a Church of England vicar. The couple could say, "We were married by a Church of England vicar," even if it were on civil hotel premises with all the trappings. What makes it a non-marriage?
Only civil marriages can take place in hotels. If a clergyman of the Church of England went mad and went and thought he could officiate at a marriage in a hotel, then the marriage would not have any legal effect.
Okay, thank you. Stephen
That's
Doughty.
what I want to know.
The Archbishop of Canterbury was widely reported after his installation as restating the Church's official position. But given the lack of unanimity and variegation that you've referred to in the Church, how do you feel he and indeed other bishops are going to approach this issue in the years to come within the Church, and what scope do you think there is for a change in position in due course if that were to be the wish of the bodies of the Church of England?
I think it's hard to tell because this has happened so quickly, this legislation, that we haven't had a House of Bishops or a General Synod working party of bishops to look at it. I think what the Archbishop, if I've understood it correctly, said very briefly was that he has to see this in the context of a worldwide communion, and for us, quite apart from our own individual consciences and what we think the Church of England ought to do, what the Church of England does and what the Archbishop does and says is observed by a worldwide communion which he leads. And I think it would be fair to say that for a great proportion of the Anglican communion around the world, this isn't even a subject that's been discussed or thought about, for understandable reasons. But in terms of how quickly things might change, well, we have at the moment a working party being chaired by Sir Joseph Pilling, looking afresh at our whole approach to issues related to human sexuality and indeed at our understanding of same-sex relationships. I think it's possible, of course, that our understanding of the status of same-sex relationships and how we treat them would change. Whether that would necessarily mean you would then approve of same-sex marriage is a quite different issue, because the tradition of marriage within the Christian Church and shared with other world faiths is so consistent over the centuries that it is one man with one woman for life, that I don't think necessarily a change in understanding of same-sex relationships would lead automatically to the Church approving of same-sex marriage. But I have to say, I'm hazarding guesses here. You ask for evidence. Evidence on these things is a bit hard to come by. I can offer opinions rather than evidence, but maybe there isn't a tremendous distinction between the two.
Andrew.
A recurring area of concern with constituents of mine has been the threat of legal challenge. Are you satisfied that the quadruple lock is sufficient enough?
Well, I think that we accept the government's good intentions in terms of protecting the religious freedom of the churches, and that is obviously something which has to be done in a different way for different churches, given that the starting point for us is different. So our position in law is different from that of all other churches. The church in Wales, whom I think you're going to see in a little while, is also, for historical reasons, in a different position, both from us and from all other churches. And then you have the other churches and faith. So I think in terms of safeguarding the ability of each church and faith to decide whether they wish to participate in same-sex marriages, I think that we believe, certainly as far as the Church of England is concerned, that the safeguarding of the position of canon law has been achieved. There is in clause 11, which is a very wide catch-all clause, which says that marriage for all purposes now means either mixed-sex or same-sex. I think that there is still a drafting difficulty in clause 11.5 about the exemption for the Church of England, which I think the government recognises. This bill has been produced at huge speed, and I don't think there's a difficulty of principle with us there, but I think there may be some further drafting to do on that. But I think overall the locks are okay. I think the thing that hasn't perhaps been said, but in some of the memoranda you've received, the point has been made, and I think it came up in the earlier session with ministers this morning, is that I think it's important not to underestimate the risk of litigation more generally in this area, and that's not just in relation to the activities of religious organisations, but people of faith. This is, I mean, like it or not, an area of culture wars. We've seen over the last few years how people will bring litigation. I think the Secretary of State for Education said quite a lot this morning about common sense and the application of reasonableness. Now, I think we would agree that if everybody approached this with common sense, all would be well. I think the difficulty, and this is where some of the provisions may repay further study, is that not everybody does approach this with reasonableness and common sense. You will get people on both sides of the argument who will want to test. As I said, I don't think this is particularly about the conducting of marriage. I think this is more about schools issues and performance of other public functions. So I think we may still have some concerns around the edge there, but the basic locks in relation to the churches and ministers of religion, we think have been done well.
If a member of a married heterosexual couple undergoes gender reassignment, under this legislation, they would not be required to annul their marriage. They would remain married as a same-sex couple. How will the church regard that same-sex marriage?
I think there may be a distinction between what's legal and what's pastoral. I mean, would you like to say what's legal, and I'll tell you what I think pastorally.
As a matter of law, that they would be whatever the Act said, which would be that they were married. So that would be the legal position. But the pastoral and theological implications are different, possibly from that.
If they've had a church wedding, will they, in there as a heterosexual couple, and that marriage continues, but one member of the couple changes gender, yes, will the marriage continue in the eyes of the church?
Well, it's already the case that clergy are not required to conduct the marriages of people who can already marry under existing law following a change of gender. That there is a conscience clause, so that clergy are not required to marry people. That's the start.
So the marriage would have continued. Is that what you're saying?
The clergy won't have to do anything.
Yeah, I am. I can think of only one couple that I know. I'm sure there are plenty of others who are in that position, who are members of a Church of England congregation, and are treated with all the honour and respect you would expect. And I suspect that congregation don't think too much about what their legal status is. They see them as human beings who are connected with each other and part of that Christian community.
I suspect the couple think about their legal
they probably do.
Their status in the eyes of the church, or may do.
I think you answered the question in response to Mr. Andrew, but just to be absolutely clear, even accepting your unease about some of the general principles behind the bill, just to be absolutely clear, you are satisfied with the protections provided to the church on the face of the bill. And if you are, which was what I think you said in answer to Mr. Andrews' question, I take it from that that you would be very resistant to any attempts to unpick those protections during the passage of the bill.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that, so far as the Church of England is concerned, whatever views you may have as individuals about its doctrine on marriage, and indeed whatever view some individuals in the Church of England may have about it, I mean, that is the Church of England's doctrine reflected in its canon law. And Clause 1 of the bill does safeguard that position, which means that the Church of England will continue to be able to marry people according to its own doctrine. And I think that any erosion of that would raise very serious issues indeed. I mean, the Church of England continues to marry on average about 1,000 couples a week. It marries them generally after bans. They don't have to go to the civil authorities at all for any preliminaries. They can simply go to the clergy, bans are read, and the member of the clergy has to send off a copy of the register at the end of the ceremony. We value that opportunity to provide that service for people. The number of Church of England weddings, in fact, increased in 2010, as indeed the number of civil weddings also increased in that year. And we want to be able to go on providing that service to people, which is why, for example, any playing around with the locks and therefore unravelling of the church-state position would be unattractive to us, because it would mean for the quarter of the population who choose to get married in church that you would be putting them through further procedure and bureaucracy, from our point of view, to no good end. So we very much value the present position, and the safeguarding of that is hugely important.
Thank you. Ben Bradshaw.
Just going back to the question that Chris Bryant raised, Bishop Graham, do you not accept that the Church of England, not yours because you have an honourable record on this, but the Church of England's opposition to this has been blunted by the Church's failure to welcome, support and celebrate civil partnerships?
Well, I think the Church of England had a varied view in relation to civil partnerships. I mean, there were a good many people in the Church of England who were very glad that civil partnerships were introduced and supported them. I think there was a big distinction between how we were to regard civil partnerships in relation to lay people within the Church of England and the clergy, and the relative ambiguity about civil partnerships in comparison with marriage, and the fact that vows didn't have to be made and it was simply a registration, I think caused us some puzzlement in trying to work all that out, which I'm quite happy to recognise. You've only got to read the pastoral statement on civil partnerships to know how anguished, in a way, in preparation for civil partnerships that debate was. So I recognise why you asked that question, and of course I'd love the whole of the Church of England to take the view that I take, but I recognise that's not entirely the case.
Stephen Williams.
Duty of the Church of England to marry whoever wishes to be married in a parish church. Would the Church of England actually like that duty to be removed?
No. I think we are in a different place from a good many other churches in continental Europe. And it is true, in England we conduct a third of all marriages. We actually can a quarter of all marriages, but a third of all first marriages, actually, because a number of people exclude themselves, thinking that they can't be married in the Church of England if they're divorced twice, to go back to an earlier question. And we want to be of service to those who live within our parishes, and I think a very considerable number of people in England look to their parish church as the natural place in which to be married, and to add to the complexity by which they would get married, which is what you would be talking about if they had to go to the civil registrar and then come to church afterwards, probably would not be appealing to them. It wouldn't be appealing to us because we recognise that the relationships that are built up with couples at the time of their marriage are very important to them. The Church of England's recently done, unusually for the Church of England, some extensive empirical research called the Church of England's Weddings Project, and worked over 2 or 3 years with hundreds of couples in 2 dioceses as different as Bradford and Oxford. And what we discovered, sometimes to the surprise of the clergy themselves, was that people did not want to be married in church because the church was beautiful. It wasn't aesthetics that caused them to come to the church. 9 out of 10 of them, actually 9.5 out of 10 of all the couples who were married, said that the most important element in their marriage was the vicar. It's not pretty vicars either. You could be really ugly. You could be really ugly as a vicar in the Church of England. But they had made a relationship with that priest prior to the marriage. They'd been prepared for their marriage. And when they came to church on the day, they knew the person who was marrying them, which isn't the case in the same way with a civil registrar. And they felt they belonged. Their criticism of us was that we did such a brilliant job in preparing people for marriage, and in the case of most marriages, what we were not good, they told us, about doing was following up them afterwards and maintaining the relationship on our side. And I think that was it was very telling for us, and we've been trying to build on that, because I do think one of the things about marriage is it's not an automatic relationship that builds society. People who are married need to belong to their communities. They need to be connected with others, and that's one of the things that the church can do extremely well. And this is the challenge to us. And we want not just to do weddings better, but we actually want to support marriage better. And I think if there's a criticism of the Church of England, it is that we've been very good on wedding ceremonies. We've been less good on supporting marriage after people are married.
It was a very long answer.
Sorry,
It was meant to be a brief question.
Chris Bryant, come back to you this time.
I think it's rather charming, Mr. McGregor, that you think that Anglican clergy only ever perform services according to the rites of the Church of England. I've been to All Saints Margaret Street for the installation of a new vicar or a new curate, which has been performed in the middle of a service of benediction, which is not a rite of the Church of England and effectively contradicts the 39 Articles. So I think that
the Church of England, I've performed it.
Indeed, and long may it be so. And I hope that the Church will remain a church and not a sect. And that's why I hope that you will continue to want to have that requirement that you perform marriages and so on. But my question, I suppose, is really, as somebody formerly a priest in the Church of England, I hope that one day the Church of England will be able to change its mind more completely on this matter. Cardinal Martini, when he was asked whether the Roman Catholic would ever have, the Roman Catholic Church would ever have women priests, said, "Not in this millennium," but that was in 1999. So I just wonder whether, when you think...
He was right.
When you... Yes, he's not around to be Pope anymore, but he's shaken, not stirred. But I just wonder whether when you think the Church of England might change its mind. This is material to the bill because we might think that all you have to lose is your locks.
Am I answering that?
Well, let me. You asked earlier you discussed the difference between evidence and assessment and opinion. I've observed our bishops in discussion around these matters and the other bodies of the Church of England, the Archbishops' Council, and I think you have to recognise the fact that, as the Bishop of Norwich has said, that the Church of England is obviously very divided on the ethical issues around same-sex relations. There are those who would want to be more affirming of civil partnerships and those in active same-sex relations, and there are many others for whom that is off limits, and you've seen that debate played out very publicly. What I would have to say is that in the private discussions there have been since the government announced its intention to introduce same-sex marriage, there has not been that same division of view. Yes, there are some people, and you've heard some members of the Church of England who've offered a minority view, but I have to say, as I observe it at the moment among the bishops, with the exception of one or two who've gone on their blogs to offer a private view, I do not detect...
It's not very private.
a personal view. And I do not detect a strong debate among our bishops around moving to accept same-sex marriage. And I think you have to understand that if ever the Church of England were to change its doctrine, that would require a change to canon law. So there would have to be an amending canon that came through the General Synod and then had the royal licence. And in addition, there would have to be a measure that went through the General Synod because it would involve a doctrinal change which is currently rooted in the Book of Common Prayer, so there would have to be a measure, and that measure would also make the necessary changes to the Marriage Act, which would then make it possible for Church of England clergy to conduct same-sex marriages. So it's possible, but I have to say my assessment is it is nowhere on the horizon.
Thank you. Jane Ellison.
And then? Obviously, been quite a lot of correspondence about adultery and consummation, and so obviously interested in your view about whether how you feel about the fact that there's no plan to redefine it within the ambit of this bill. But also a question suddenly occurred to me that if somebody in a heterosexual marriage, if people commit adultery or are unfaithful with somebody of the same sex as themselves, is that currently covered by the definition? In other words, is there already an inconsistency that if a woman was unfaithful to her husband but with another woman, does that already not qualify as adultery?
It's a matter of law, isn't it?
That wouldn't amount to adultery.
No. Right, so there's already an inconsistency.
Yes, and so the same definition of adultery is effectively maintained. So adultery can only be committed between two people of the opposite sex.
Right.
Sounds like Mr. Fittall's long drawn-out process is described as unlikely to happen in this millennium either for the Church of England. Just contrary to what the Culture Secretary said earlier, the Church of England does have a unique position on the face of the bill, effectively being able to discriminate against marrying same-sex couples. Do you think that is going to harm the image of the Church of England if this law goes through, in that it will uniquely be able to discriminate as laid out in law?
I'm not sure I follow that it's a unique position. It is only unique because the Church of England has canons which have the force of the law of land. It has the duty to marry, and it has its own devolved legislature. So we start from a unique position in law, but in substance what the government set out to do is to create for us, as for all other denominations, the ability to continue to approach marriage according to our own doctrines, and if in due course any church, any denomination changes its view, then it's able to do so. So I don't think we have a unique position. I think the only area where we have a worry, which I think is unique to us, is whether in due course the Strasbourg courts might take the view, Strasbourg court might take the view that because we act as a public authority, and as I explained earlier, you don't have to go through any separate state procedure in order to be married in a Church of England church. Whether, if there were to be litigation, the Strasbourg court might take the view, not that it was going to compel the Church of England to conduct same-sex marriages. I don't think we think that would happen. But whether that, as it were, discrimination by a public authority might be contrary to Strasbourg jurisprudence. Now, there's nothing to go on at the moment, and we've flagged that risk. We think the government has sought to do what it can in the bill to mitigate that. But I think the simple fact is that if you change the law on marriage, there is a risk, and we shall see what happens over time.
That's not really my point. I don't dispute that. It's what do you think the effect on the image of the Church of England will be? Because the uniqueness of the position is the position you described now. It would be a very, very long, drawn-out process for the Church of England to be able to to change its position other than being able to opt in, as some other churches would much more simply be able to do. Do you think that this law, if it goes through, where the Church of England is in the position of automatically not being able to include same-sex married couples, that it will be damaging to the image of the Church of England in the public consciousness?
Well, I don't see why it should be, because underlying that question is the assumption that it's a deeply unpopular position not to be in favour of same-sex marriage. I think if you look at the results of the government's consultation and of the petitions that came in, and if you look at the opinion polling, this is a matter on which the country remains pretty divided. There are very strong views around. And I think that people also respect faith traditions, whether they share those faith traditions or not, that have their own views and their own integrity. So I don't see a difficulty for the Church of England in having this position. And indeed, I struggle a little bit to see how the law can be different unless it were the view of Parliament and government that it should, in a sense, impose its view on the churches. Now, I think there has been interest in what's happened in one or two Scandinavian countries where the relationship between the Parliament and the state church is rather different from how it is here. And of course, if you go back in history, Parliament did legislate directly for the Church of England because it didn't have separate governance bodies of its own. But I think we have reached the place now where we're regarded, like all other churches and denominations, as having the ability to decide our own doctrine and to act accordingly.
And the final question to Ben Bradshaw.
Some other faiths, we expect, will conduct same-sex marriages as a result of this legislation. What advice will you give teachers in Church of England schools in the way in which they teach about the importance and nature of marriage?
Well, I think we try always to respond positively to what the Secretary of State suggests in relation to the Education Act, which is to do with recognising the value of marriage. And I suppose it's possible, although I was listening to what the Secretary of State for Education was saying, it's possible a lot further down the line there may be some conflict there, which I think you were exploring. I mean, our own view is that the promotion of marriage is part of sex and relationship education. What I think Church of England schools are very good at doing, because the vast majority of them are community schools, is integrating the convictions of the Church of England with a recognition that the Christian opinions that are held in that school are not totally recognised within the whole of wider society. So there's a balance to be struck, and I think the Secretary of State for Education was right in saying that in teaching there will need to be a recognition that we have a society in which same-sex, I mean, assuming this bill goes through, in which same-sex marriages are possible, and of course the teacher would also indicate why it is that within the majority of Christian traditions these marriages are not celebrated. I suspect it's not, I mean, my sense is that it's not going to be a huge part of sex and relationship education. I mean, my regret, if I'm honest, in our schools and in most schools is that marriage is not talked about very much at all. And I think if we could reconsider, I mean, how marriage is talked about within schools, that would be valuable. It's sometimes resisted for understandable reasons, because I can think in a number of our schools, the majority of the children there do not come from homes where they have married parents. And it's that reason, nothing to do with what the Secretary of State says or what the Church says, that causes teachers to be very reluctant to teach about marriage. Now, if, whatever one makes of this bill, if we could have better teaching about marriage itself in our schools, and this bill could bring it about, I would welcome that. But I do think it's an area, you've explored it with the Secretary of State, it's an area of potential tension in the future. I recognise that. But there may be some benefits as well.
Bishop. Ben Bradshaw, and then Jim Shannon will have the final question. Ben.
Sorry, Mr. Fittall, I must correct you on the opinion polling and refer you to the very helpful document prepared for this committee by the House of Commons Library, which shows that all of the opinion polls show clear majorities in favour, except those which had very leading questions that were commissioned by the Christian Institute, including majorities, I have to say, of people of faith in support of equal marriage. But my question is, how many, as you raise the prospect or the spectre of successful litigation, how many divorced people have successfully forced the Church of England in the courts to remarry them in their parish church against the wishes of their local priest?
I did not suggest that we had any anxiety that we would be forced to marry people, and I agree that I'm not aware of any litigation of that kind. I think the issue is not whether we would be compelled, and as I've said, we've expressed satisfaction about that. It's more the ability to act, as it were, in the shoes of the state in marrying people without any separate state formalities. That is the issue.
Litigation, as
Correct.
described by the questioner. Final question then, Mr. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I first of all apologise for lateness. I'm just straight off the plane. I'm sorry I couldn't be here just in time. Apologies to the deputation as well. Certainly from the opinion polls that I have, they very clearly would re-endorse the comments that you have made earlier on, which is in relation to the opposition to this. Can I ask you a question, probably to yourself, Reverend Alexander McGregor, in relation to the quadruple lock? Do you feel, or are you reassured as a church and as an organisation about the quadruple lock? Do you feel it does give you the security legally that you feel is necessary? Does it give the security and the job support to those teachers who would perhaps maybe want to would feel it on at ease in relation to discussing this matter? I would like to hear what your feelings would be with that.
There are two different things there, because the quadruple lock is not concerned with things like the position of teachers. It's concerned with solely with the position of the church institutionally and with ministers of the church in relation to the carrying out of marriages. And as far as that's concerned, we think that the provisions in the bill are essentially right. There are one or two very small issues at the edges which we'll talk to the government about, but yes, we think that the way that's been drafted is generally okay. The position, we've talked a bit earlier about the position with regard to teachers in schools, and the bill doesn't really go into any detail about that at all. It simply changes the definition of marriage, and of course teachers will then need to deal with that in a sensitive and professional way. But yes, there will be, people will be concerned about that, and I think we've already said something about that in our evidence.
Thank you very much. And we did cover these subjects earlier to Mr. Janet, and Hansard will help you, I think, on that. Thank you very much indeed to this set of witnesses, to Bishop James and your colleagues. Much appreciated, very helpful. Thank you once again. They were good. Set of witnesses can come forward. We have a lot to get through this morning. Yeah, that's about the only thing. Well, colleagues, we have a lot to get through, so we will make progress. Welcome to our next set of witnesses. Thank you very much for being here with us this morning. Could you kindly introduce yourselves for the record?
Yes, I am Archbishop Peter Smith, Archbishop of Southwark, the other side of the river, and Vice President of the Bishops' Conference of England and Wales.
Thank you.
On my right is Professor Chris McCrudden, of Blackstone Chambers, who is our legal advisor on this matter of the bill. And on my left is Charles Wookey, who is Assistant General Secretary to the conference.
Thank you very much. Unless you want to make an opening statement, we'll go straight to questions. Are you happy with that, Archbishop?
I think I am. I think we need to get on to the nitty-gritty.
Nitty-gritty is good. Mr. Chris Bryant.
Is homosexuality incurable or curable?
I don't think that's a relevant question. What we are coming here to do, and my understanding was that having examined the bill, there are difficulties which we foresee for the future.
But your paper that you submitted to us, your 29-page paper, makes an argument essentially that it's a moral disorder and that therefore same-sex marriage will undermine society. So I would have thought it goes to the very heart of the matter, whether you believe that homosexuality is curable or not.
We haven't mentioned homosexuality as such in our paper or in our public pronouncements on this. What we've been saying right from the start is that marriage for millennia has been between a man and a woman, and it's about the complementarity of the two sexes. That's what is the important and fundamental issue when it comes to marriage. But men and women are different. It's not rocket science looking around this room to look at each other and say, well, we are different, without going into all the gory details.
Yeah, but tall people and short people are different. That doesn't necessarily mean you should only have tall people marrying short people or fat people marrying thin people. Difference is neither here nor there, I would have thought. More important is that if you believe that somehow or other... In olden teaching, it was that homosexuality was a choice. It was something that somebody had voluntarily chosen to adopt. And then I could understand why you would say, all right, we believe that no homosexuals should be allowed to enter into relationships. If you no longer believe that it's curable or that it's a matter of choice, then it seems to me fundamentally cruel to deny companionship, lifelong companionship, to two people just because they are of the same gender.
We're not complaining about lifelong commitment between two people of the same sex. The fact of the matter is, when the Act bringing about civil partnerships was passed...
Were you in favour of it then?
No, because we said that was the thin end of the wedge. This would end up going to marriage rather than civil partnership. There was a different way of dealing with the request from same-sex couples to have equivalent rights to those who are married, a man and woman. Those rights were given quite clearly in that Act, and just a personal experience, before, just at the end of last year, I was asked to go on a debate about this on Radio Wales. One of the others on the debate was a very prominent Catholic homosexual. When I stated the Church's position, I thought we're going to have a real ding-dong here, possibly. And when he was asked what he thought of what I'd said, he said, I fully agree with the Archbishop. He said, I'm fully accepted in my parish. People know who I am, what I am. And he said, I have no problem with that. I've been welcomed and respected. And he said, as a homosexual, he said, I do not approve of this move to gay marriage.
Williams.
It's a reasonable assumption that same-sex marriage will become the law of the land sometime later this year. What will be the guidance that the Catholic Education Service gives to Catholic schools to teach children about marriage in this new context?
Well, this is one of the real difficulties we have, not just for our own schools, but for any teacher in any school. Could I ask Professor McCrudden, please, to go into the details of this?
If I may, the question's partly relating to the guidance that the Secretary of State is giving. So there's two separate elements to it, as it were. So what are the implications of the bill, assume an Act, as it currently stands for teachers? But then the separate question is, what is the effect of the bill on the guidance that the Secretary of State is required to produce? Obviously, any Catholic schools are required to take into account that guidance. Our concern is that Clause 11 in particular of the bill, when read together with the power that's given to the Secretary of State to issue guidance, essentially changes the nature of the guidance, and that currently causes a problem. So the answer briefly to your question is the guidance that will be given in Catholic schools is going to have to wait until we see precisely what amendments or otherwise are going to be brought in by Parliament to that particular aspect of the bill. I can go into more detail on that if you prefer.
Specifically, will children attending Catholic schools be told that possibly parents of children in the class are committing a sin if they have a same-sex civil marriage?
I think I've made the point that partly it's going to depend on the question of the guidance that and the interpretation of the guidance that the Secretary of State has currently issued. The question is whether the bill in Clause 11, that very general provision in Clause 11, affects materially the current interpretation of the guidance because it changes the definition of marriage. And secondly, and more particularly for the future, whether future Secretaries of State issuing the guidance will either be required or will choose to alter the guidance.
Thank you. Ben Bradshaw.
Archbishop, you just acknowledged that the Roman Catholic Church opposes civil partnerships, as indeed you have opposed every reform that has brought equality to lesbian and gay people in this country for the last 20 years. Why should we believe that your opposition to this is about marriage rather than about your disapproval of lesbian and gay relationships?
Well, it's clearly about the nature of marriage, because marriage is between a man and a woman, always has been. That's the key issue, and we keep getting diverted onto questions of equality or religious freedom. The nub of the argument is who, by their natural being, can be married.
But wouldn't your opposition to this on the basis of marriage be more credible and carry more authority if you'd been supportive or were supportive of civil partnerships and all of the other reforms that have benefited lesbian and gay people in this country?
The Church's teaching is quite clear on this, about the Church's attitude to homosexuality. And it says quite clearly in the Catechism of the Church that homosexual people must be respected and dealt with sensitively. Morally speaking, no, we say sexual relationships outside marriage of whatever kind are not right, they're not moral. So there's a very consistent teaching of the Church on this. We're not trying to do down homosexuals. I know many homosexuals. I get on with them very well. But at the end of the day, we, as bishops and as a church, we have a duty to teach what Christ taught, rooted in his background of the Old Testament, and it's not for us as bishops to change that teaching.
But sorry, that wasn't my question. You talked about treating gay and lesbian people with respect. But you have opposed the Goods and Services Act, you've opposed legislation that has provided equality not for relationships, but for lesbian and gay people as individuals.
No, it isn't.
You have. Did you support the equal age of consent?
Yes. We are here to talk about this particular bill. I think it's important, and I think the answers have been given. Kate Green.
I ask you the same question I asked the representatives of the Church of England. If an opposite-sex couple marry in a Catholic church and subsequently one member of that couple undergoes gender reassignment, do they remain married in the eyes of the Catholic Church? They will under this law in the eyes of the law.
Well, they would in the Catholic Church as well.
There'll be a same-sex couple at that point.
Well, perhaps legally, but...
So you don't accept the reassignment of gender?
I don't accept that we can change somebody's gender. There is a real difficulty. There is a real difficulty when it comes to what's called gender dysphoria. Somebody who is very inclined to think that they're opposite to what they are.
Thank you. Simon Kirby has a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Parliament redefined marriage about 177 years ago in 1836.
Was it right to do so? And if so, why isn't it right to do so today?
Well, I'm not quite sure which act you're referring to. But
I think you'll find it's the act that gave Catholics the right to marry in their own church.
But it didn't say that two people of the same sex could marry. The point is, various aspects of the marital relationship have changed over the years. I mean, donkey's years ago, very often a woman was regarded as a chattel of the man. Now that was wrong, as we look back now with a more enlightened look on it. Never at any stage until now has it ever been suggested that marriage can be between other than a man and a woman. That is the key issue. And it's the consequences of that that we want to talk about in this bill.
Jonathan Reynolds.
The list of countries that already have same-sex marriage includes not just societies we might think of as typically being very progressive, like Scandinavia or the Netherlands or Belgium, but countries like Spain, like Mexico, with very significant Catholic populations. What's your assessment of how same-sex marriages operate in those countries, and could you identify any particular problems in those countries with how the law is operated?
It's still not entirely clear, and it depends from country to country, but I'm told that in Canada there have been considerable difficulties over this in regard to teachers, in regard to people who have in their personal blogs and so on have said that they oppose the notion, the very notion, the principle of same-sex marriage, and they've been disciplined. Now, I haven't got concrete evidence from all the countries, or the few countries that have brought that this in at all. Chris, please.
If I may, in response to the question, the common issue is that all of those countries have sought to protect the religious freedom of particular churches. Each country has dealt with it in a somewhat different way because of the different traditions in those countries. So the issue, I think, that if I could guide the committee a little on, is whether or not the protections that the government intends to introduce here are going to work in the domestic context. And in that, it's quite difficult to have a comparative experience that's particularly useful because each country deals with it in a somewhat different way.
Thank you. Jim Shannon.
Sure, thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming along, and I support wholeheartedly your assertion that marriage should be between one man and one woman, and respect that in the way as well what you do. Thank you. Archbishop, you stated that clearly that marriage is between a man and a woman, as the Bible teaches. Do you feel that the majority of your church supports that? Can I ask you a further question in relation to if the legal definition of marriage changes, the law will require the children to learn about gay marriage as part of sex education. Do you feel there should be exemption for Roman Catholic schools and for faith schools?
Yeah. Well, in answer to your first one, yes, I think the vast majority of Catholics would accept the teaching of the Church. Because if they couldn't in this and other very serious matters, they would probably leave the Church, as some do. On the your second question.
Second question is about the teaching. If the legal definition of marriage changes, the law will require the children learn about gay marriage as part of sex education. Do you feel there should be exemption for the Roman Catholic schools or for faith schools?
Could I ask again, Professor McCrudden, to speak on this?
We're really back to the same question about the guidance. And if I could answer the question in this way, at a bit greater length. Section 403 of the Education Act, and I'm sorry to be technical on this, says that the Secretary of State has a duty to give guidance which must be taken into account by schools, including Catholic schools, on the nature of marriage and its importance for family life and the bringing up of children. Clause 11 of the bill says, in the law of England and Wales, which obviously includes Section 403 that I've just quoted, marriage has the same effect in relation to same-sex couples as it has in relation to opposite-sex couples. So, In other words, the nature of marriage in section 403 must therefore be read subject to this new provision. So that effectively amends section 403. So the interpretation, and that interpretation is strengthened by clause 11.2 of the bill in particular terms. So what does that mean? It means effectively that the duty on the Secretary of State to issue guidance is effectively amended, not in terms, but effectively amended, to require the Secretary of State to issue guidance on the nature of marriage between opposite sex and same-sex couples. Now, if the guidance simply said that it's a question descriptively of schools telling pupils that this is the case, that the law has changed, that of course causes no problems at all. The problem arises because the guidance specifically is to be set in the context of a moral discussion about these issues. That's the terms of the legislation. And in particular, that it's a question of the importance of marriage, which clearly brings a normative question into play. So given that there has now been an amendment, effectively, of Section 403, the question arises whether or not that causes a problem in practice in the schools. And you've identified that it does, I think, by the implication of your question. So to short-circuit then to the question about an amendment, we will be clearly suggesting two different kinds of amendments to safeguard the position. One is to ensure that the current guidance is interpreted in particular schools to reflect the importance of the particular ethos of that school. And secondly, an amendment that will ensure that Section 403 cannot be interpreted to give the Secretary of State the power to impose a particular meaning of marriage in terms of what's being required, if that is contrary again to the ethos of the school.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Stuart, Andrew.
Can I ask you the same question I asked the representatives from the Church of England, whether or not you're satisfied that the quadruple lock in this bill will prevent a successful legal challenge to compel religious organisations to conduct same-sex marriages?
The brief answer is no.
Why?
The answer is no. The reasoning for the answer being no is quite complicated. So if you can bear with me. The problem arises in particular with regard, hence the 29-page memo that was commented on earlier on. The problem arises because of clause 2.1. As you're aware, clause 2.1 at the moment says a person may not be compelled, a person including an institution here, including a religious institution, may not be compelled to undertake an opt-in activity or to refrain from undertaking an opt-in activity. Yep. The question essentially is whether or not there is a risk to the Catholic Church, which, as I understand, I'm instructed, will not exercise a power to opt in, whether or not that decision not to opt in is reviewable in any respect. I remind you, by the way, that the impact assessment that was produced by the department says in terms that there will be protections for religious bodies who do not want to perform same-sex marriages, not just from successful legal claims, but from the threat of litigation. So the question is whether there is a credible, not a certain, but a credible challenge that can be mounted to the decision by the Church not to opt in. And the answer is, yes, there is. And the reason why, I can go into in some considerable detail, but the short answer is, no, we're not satisfied.
Thank you very much. Stephen Doughty.
Despite what you've just said, I still remain significantly unconvinced. And I guess my fundamental concern goes back to the fundamental principles of this bill. This bill is laid out as a permissive measure to allow for civil marriage and for those religious organisations that wish to want to conduct marriage to do so. It's not mandatory. It's not forcing you to do it. why are the Catholic Church in particular, spending so much time worrying about this? I think that's a question that a lot of people would ask. It's a question a lot of people have asked me. Why are you spending so much time worrying about this? It doesn't affect you.
Well, it will affect us. This is precisely what Professor McCrudden is saying. The way the bill is worded in certain clauses, it is open to legal challenge.
All right, thank you. Stephen Gilbert.
Thank you, Chairman. Where has there been a successful legal challenge in European countries that have same-sex marriage so far?
Well, there's two ways of answering that. One is rather blandly and not very helpfully. This is a very recent phenomenon.
10 years in Catholic Spain.
Yeah. So the more substantive answer is that different countries organize their relationship with the churches in different ways. And the question is whether, in terms of this bill, in this context, in domestic courts in particular, there is a substantial risk. And the answer, in terms of the legal advice that's been provided, and I'm very happy to go into this in considerable detail, as I hope the committee will, the answer is that the position is not secure. In other words, why is the Church concerned? The Church is concerned because there is a possibility of review in the domestic courts. I'm not talking now for the moment about the European courts, though that's a separate question that we can get on to. The question is whether there is a significant risk in the domestic courts for decisions not to opt in by the Church being reviewable, and the answer is yes.
So the answer, in the 10 years that Spain's had same-sex marriage and other countries in Europe have had same-sex marriage, there hasn't been a successful legal case forcing the Catholic Church to offer same-sex marriage. Can I ask on the domestic issue, to pick up Professor McCrudden's point there, has the Catholic Church in the United Kingdom ever been forced to offer marriage to divorcees against its will by a domestic legal action?
The answer again is no, but irrelevant. And the reason why, if I could explain why legally the question is different, we're concerned to try to help the committee on the details here. The reason why it's different is because under the Human Rights Act, there is specific protection, rightly, for non-discrimination under Article 14, read with Article 8 and particularly with Article 12, which has been interpreted by the Court of Human Rights and therefore is applicable in the British context under the Human Rights Act, particular protection on the grounds of sexual orientation. The reason why that is the case is because of the importance that the court attaches, particularly to discrimination on grounds of sexual orientation. We have no problem with that. It does, however, create a significant difference in terms of risk, in terms of challenges based on discrimination on sexual orientation, than it does on other grounds.
Okay, thank you for pausing there. I was going to ask Siobhan McDonough to ask her question now, but Stephen Doughty's giving me such grief, he must come in right now.
Thank you, Mr. Streeter. It's on this point particularly. I was just wondering, therefore, what you made of the Noble Lord Panic's evidence to the committee, where he says very, very clearly the European Court of Human Rights to compel a religious body or its adherents to conduct a religious marriage would require a legal miracle much greater than the parting of the Red Sea. I mean, he's given a very, very clear position here, and I was wondering what you made of his arguments.
We're addressing a different question.
Well, no, he refers to the legal position here. And
with respect, if I could, first of all, I haven't read Lord Panic's evidence to the committee, and I suspect he hasn't read ours. Well, because it only came to you last night. But the point, and I have to say, I have enormous respect for Lord Panic. I have acted with Lord Panic, and we are in the same chambers. So this is an intra-Blackstone debate that's in here, that's coming about. The point is this: the point is not with regard, for the moment, to to Clause 2.2. The point that we're raising is with regard to Clause 2.1. And Lord Panic's evidence relates to whether or not you can be compelled under Article 2.2. The issue that we're raising is whether or not there is a way in which the Church, in deciding not to opt in is challengeable. And it's quite clear that the government has considered this issue and has sought to address the problem with regard to 2.2. So, for example, if I could give a particular example, you've seen that there is an exception for non-discrimination, an amendment to Section 29 of the Equality Act. With regard to 2.2, there is not an amendment with regard to 2.1. And the question is why? And the assumption has to be that the reason is that the government has decided that the exercise of the option under 2.1 is not a public function. That is, in our view, a questionable assumption. And we've set out, again, in some detail, the reason why it is a questionable assumption. I can go into the reasons for that in a moment.
You submitted this evidence to the committee. Did you say you submitted it last night?
Yes.
Excellent, because we obviously need to, I haven't seen it yet, we need to study that carefully. Siobhan McDonough.
Your Grace, I'm sorry, but I couldn't feel that I could let your comment go that Catholics who support gay marriage or support gay people or oppose the Church's teaching on abortion or oppose the Church's teaching on divorce probably would leave the Church. I think all those things, and I'm never going to leave the Church. Yeah. I'm a practicing Catholic. And I have to say to you that there are vast numbers of people in parishes, certainly all around South London, who share my particular view. And I am concerned today that you have presented a view of the Church to many people who will not be very cognizant of the Catholic Church, which is quite different to how it operates. And that is that Catholic schools have always been able to explain their view on abortion, on divorce, on all sorts of things, at the same time as carrying out their responsibilities to those young people in teaching sex education and moral teachings. That there is no dilemma about that, that we all understand it, but it has been done with kindness and courtesy. And what disappoints me is the way that we're falling into legalese to show the Church in a very unkind and uncaring way.
Well, because, sorry, Chris.
Of course, that's correct. The question is, and the reason why we're before the committee, is with regard to the problems that the bill may cause. And one of the questions, I'm afraid to slip into legalese again, is the effect of the bill on the guidance. That doesn't relate to abortion and those other questions. It relates specifically to the question of marriage. That's why it's different.
Okay, Jane Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Streeter. I have a lot of sympathy with the previous point made, having been brought up as a Catholic. Society's moved on in its attitudes to sort of, the level of discrimination we accept in sort of the provision of services, etc. But obviously a lot of people have expressed concerns to MPs that people will not be allowed to exercise their conscience as they see. I mean, what are your comments about that? And what would you expect of someone who is, providing a public service? The example's been given of a Catholic hotelier already provides, does civil partnerships. Would you expect them to that they'd have to kind of accept the law of the land? And just generally your view about whether people in that position should reflect society's new norms about discrimination?
Well, obviously, we must all accept what the law says, in the sense that this is the legal position, as probably may well be the case this bill will go through. It redefines marriage. We accept that will be the law of the land. It doesn't mean we approve of it. And I might have will have some very fierce reasons for not accepting it in moral terms. The difficulty is going to come, I think, and again I'd ask Professor McCrudden just to comment on this. We're concerned about the possible difficulties of freedom of expression. Chris, would you just...
I think there are several issues that arise with regard to Ms. Ellison's question. One is that the point about reflecting the norms of society means that public authorities are likely also to want the norms of society to be reflected. One of our concerns only one, but one of our concerns is with regard, for example, to Section 149 of the Equality Act. So taking the interpretation that you've just put forward, that, as it were, the Church should reflect, or should get its act together and reflect changes in mores, may well be a position that public authorities also will take. The problem is that Section 149 of the Equality Act, in terms of the public sector equality duty, means that they may well try to penalise the Church for deciding not to opt in. That has particularly important implications with regard, for example, to relationships between public authorities and the Church over grants, over contracts. So one of the concerns we have is not just in terms of individual freedom of expression, though we also have concerns there as well, in terms of the Public Order Act and incitement to hatred provisions, but also more generally in terms of relations between the Church institutionally and public authorities, given the problems that Section 149 will now seem to create.
A very brief question. I suppose putting into reverse a question often put to us. But if a Catholic who takes your view on this applies for, after the legislation is passed, applies for and gets a job as, say, a public registrar, and then says it's against my conscience, I mean, what's your view of that?
Well, again, that's another thing we're bringing up. There's a difficulty. Could be.
Well, very much so. I should at this point say that, as you know, I've been advising.
Can I just to clarify? I suppose what I'm asking is, what do you regard it as reasonable if somebody knowingly seeks a conflict with a job they're applying for, or
Yeah, I need to put in a caveat here. First of all, I'm, as well as representing the Church, I've also been involved in representing Ms. Liddell. And so the committee should know that, because obviously I'm representing the Church here, but it does have implications. I've cleared this with my clients, but nevertheless the committee should know this. So with regard to the question, there's two different questions. The question is, one, whether existing registrars should be able to gain an exemption, those already in place. And as you know, the Liddell case was that kind in the civil partnership context. And as you also know, the European Court of Human Rights has recently held against Ms. Liddell in that. Despite the fact that, and this is relevant for the committee's considerations, despite the fact that the Court of Appeal had decided and the Court of Human Rights accepted that it would have no effect whatsoever on the delivery of the service. So one question relates to existing registrars. Second question, and the thrust of your question, relates to new registrars, as it were, who are coming into place.
Or in a similar position.
Exactly so. And we'll be suggesting to the committee, and indeed we have in our memorandum, that amendments be introduced to cope with both of those provisions. And so essentially the answer to your question is that we regard that as a difficulty for registrars.
Thank you. We have three questions left. Ben Bradshaw, Jonathan Reynolds, and then Chris Bryan. Ben Bradshaw.
Archbishop, you referred earlier to marriage being an institution that went back millennia exclusively between a man and a woman. Have you studied the tradition of same-sex unions going back millennia, including those conducted by the early church?
As far as I'm aware, in church history, that's never been the case.
Nods?
Thank you, Chair. One of the themes that seems to be coming out of the evidence sessions that we've held this morning is how we will address perhaps some of the anomalies that might be created by the same-sex marriage bill. And therefore, can I ask you, what would be your view on any amendments that changed the legal definition of adultery or non-consummation of a marriage as grounds for divorce? And accordingly, what would be your view on any amendment which extended civil partnerships to heterosexual couples?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how the issue is addressed to the church in particular.
All right. Well, that's fine. Thank you. And I was optimistic, Chris. I'm going to give you a final question in a moment, but before that, Helen Grant.
Archbishop Smith, in relation to the transgender provisions in the bill, and picking up a point made by Kate Green earlier, you indicated that the person changing gender would be legally married, but questioned whether it would be possible to actually do that. I just wondered if you could tell me whether that person and that couple would still be treated as part of the Catholic community and welcomed with dignity and respect.
They would certainly be part of the Catholic community, but we wouldn't approve, if you like, well, we can't. The Church is teaching you can't change gender. Now, I know that's not the current mores out in secular society. So, I mean, I couldn't, as a priest or a bishop, if somebody came along and said they had changed their gender, I would have to say to them, from the Church's point of view, you can't get married.
But your point earlier was that you would nonetheless welcome them with respect and dignity, I think.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Always, always.
Desmond Swain.
I was just interested, earlier on you stated explicitly that marriage can always be between a man and a woman, and just now you answered Ben Bradshaw, but I can certainly recall being taught at school that 3 Roman emperors married other men, but why did the Theodosian Penal Code of 340 AD explicitly ban same-sex marriage on pain of death if it hadn't been happening at all?
I have no idea is the answer to that one.
It's a brilliant question. It's got nothing to do with the bill, and not a lot to. A final question to Chris Bryant.
I'm sorry, but I disagree with the way you're chairing this, I'm afraid, Chair. But Bishop, it seems slightly odd that you've been asked about adultery and you've not got anything, that the Church has no position on adultery, and you've not got any view on the historic teaching of the patristic fathers. But you said in your evidence, you personally said that you have moral objections to the bill, but you've not yet articulated them. I wonder whether you'd like to do so.
Well, the moral objection, I say, is this is what I cannot understand. All we've said right from the start is, historically, marriage has always been between a man and a woman for obvious reasons, because a man and a woman have complementary genders. They're designed, if you like, to come together in a loving partnership. Their love for each other issues, as it were, in ordinary circumstances with the production of new life. And it's within that context, that loving relationship for life of mother and of husband and wife, mother and father, that all the social reports of recent years say that is the best environment in which to bring up children in a stable. And a psychologist will say we need, as children, to have that complementary relationship looking after us.
So as a moral argument then, the marriage of the Prince of Wales, whilst his wife's partner is still alive, both of them being divorcees, is immoral.
What we would say there is, once somebody is validly married, they can't marry again during the lifetime of they can't marry validly during the lifetime of their spouse.
Thank you very much indeed, Archbishop, for your answers and for your team. That concludes our session right now. We're very grateful to you for coming. We appreciate your answers. We're going to suspend the hearing just for 10 minutes for a pit stop, and we'll start again at 10:29 sharp. Thank you. We are
actually the Chancellor is strongly pro this. I mean, strongly pro it. So.
We resume our deliberations, and we welcome another set of expert witnesses, and invite you please to introduce yourselves for the record.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. I'm the Right Reverend John Davis, the Bishop of Swansea and Brecon in the Church in Wales, and my role within the bench of bishops in Wales is to have something to say on matters relating to church and society. On my right is John Shirley, the Provincial Secretary of the Church in Wales, and on my left, Charles Anderson, the Head of Legal Services of the Church in Wales.
Thank you. And with your permission, we'll move straight to questions, if that's in order.
Well, Chairman, I'd hate to disagree with you right at the beginning, but I'm wondering whether it might be helpful if I could say just a little about the reason the Church in Wales has been invited to participate.
Yes, thank you.
Just in case there's any confusion. One of the things that has not always been recognised is that in relation to the law of marriage, when the Church in Wales was disestablished in the 20s, the role of the Church in relation to its duty to marry, the common law duty, was retained. And so from that perspective, the Church in Wales is in the same position as that of the Church of England. We have a duty to marry parishioners regardless of any religious affinity. That is in the briefing paper that we have sent in, but I did want to make that clear.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
First question, Chris Bryant.
They're not just expert witnesses, they're Welsh expert witnesses, which makes them far more expert. And I would merely point out that the first Labour MP for the Rhondda, in fact, there's only ever been Labour ones, but in Mabon in 1885 was arguing for the disestablishment of the Church in Wales, but recognised that you should still have the important legislation that we provided for. Can I just ask, because when the first version was brought out of where this bill was going in relation to the Church in Wales, there seemed to be some briefing that it would make it virtually impossible for the Church in Wales ever to change its mind on this view, on this matter, and it seems as if you want to keep the door at least a little bit open.
Yes, I mean, there is a caricature, well, there are two caricatures, Mr. Bryant, of the Church as a whole. One of which is that it exists to give the elderly something to do for an hour on Sunday. The second is that here come the Christians and they must be against something. Now, that runs entirely counter, as I understand it at any rate, to the ethic of the gospel. The ethic of the gospel is that the Church exists to bring the fullness of life to as many people as possible, rooted and grounded in the kind of love made evident in the life and ministry of the Lord Jesus. And that's the business that we're in. Now, in terms of our mixed up relationship with the law of marriage, that doesn't always appear very evident, I have to say. But from the perspective of the Church in Wales and its ability to change, because of its disestablished nature, but nevertheless our duty to marry, had the bill as presented originally been passed without any provision for the Church in Wales, it would have required a separate Act of Parliament for the Church in Wales' position in relation to equal same-sex marriage to be altered. Is that clear to members of the committee? There's an analogous situation arose in relation to the changes brought about in 2010 about the location in which people could actually be married. And fortunately, Lord Roberto and Alan Michael MP were able to put a bill through Parliament which changed the position from our perspective. But the Church of England's position is that it can pass measures in General Synod which become, subject to parliamentary approval, the law of the land. That is not the situation in relation to decisions of the governing body of the Church in Wales. We might have said, yes, we will marry people of the same sex, but we would not have been able to without an Act of Parliament changing the bill as originally published.
So the churches opposed abolition of slavery in the early 19th century and then moved on and so on. When do you think the Church in Wales might perform its first same-sex marriage?
Well, I'm not gifted with the ability to read crystal balls or tea leaves, I'm afraid, but I mean the procedure would be the Church in Wales governing body would have to debate the issue of same-sex relationships, and it has not had the opportunity to do that in relation to this particular measure as yet. The bench of bishops themselves in Wales, although we are small in number, have not actually had the opportunity to produce a detailed statement on the provisions of the bill. What we have been able to do is make our concerns in terms of the procedure known to government officials, and we are indeed extremely grateful for the very hard work put in by those government officials, together with Mr Shirley, Mr Anderson and others, just before Christmas, to produce what is now Clause 8 in the bill, which takes account of our rather difficult and strange position. So I'm afraid I can't give you an absolute answer to that.
Thank you. Stephen Williams.
Mr James, in context, Mr Bryant gave his context. I was brought up in Abercynon in South Wales and went to Maria English Baptist Church, which for the benefit of others means services were conducted predominantly in English rather than the people were English. And at that point there were many chapels in all South Wales villages, but sadly that's no longer the case. In many cases it's only, ironically, the church in Wales building. There's still the sort of operational religious premises in each village. St Donald's Church would be the example in Abercynon. So how many marriages are now conducted in Wales in Wales churches?
I think it's about 3,500. I think Mr Shirley's
as a proportion, of all marriages?
As a proportion, it's just under 30%. The last figures for which we have statistics from the ONS for the total number of marriages in Wales is 2009. Then there were 12,500. Of which 3,500 were conducted in Church in Wales churches, and there were another 1,300 in religious premises of other denominations.
Just so we get a like-for-like comparison of what the Church of England said earlier, is that of first marriages or all marriages?
That would be all marriages.
Right.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. You mentioned the Clause 8, and I just wanted to test with you whether you feel that that is strong enough. I mean, there is a risk, I guess, inherent in it that a Lord Chancellor could refuse to issue the order, even if the Church changed its mind. And I was just wondering whether you think that is sufficient or whether you think it needs to be amended or strengthened in any way.
I mean, Charles Anderson can say something about that. I think we would probably prefer it to say shall.
Shall, okay.
That there would be a requirement for the Lord Chancellor to make the necessary order, bringing into effect a scheme which presumably would have been approved in advance by our governing body and the bench of bishops. But I think having got it may be a slip of the pen. I think we prefer shall.
Important to examine. So.
I think so. In fact, I wouldn't have very much to add to what the Bishop has just said. I think the word shall would be appreciated.
Thank you.
But we feel otherwise it should take care of matters.
Thank you. Helen Grant.
Just on that Clause 8 point, with the exception of that may, shall word, are you quite satisfied with the procedure set out in Clause 8? Notwithstanding those two issues, but if those two issues were dealt with, are you quite happy that would allow the Church in Wales to conduct same-sex marriages if it chose to do that in the future?
If it chose to do so, after the debate and discussion and decision of the governing body, I think that we would want to be very clear that, within the life of the Church, which, as I indicated earlier on, is not all about giving elderly people something to do for an hour on a Sunday. The Church is a broad church, pardon the repetition, and it does contain people who can interpret Scripture and doctrine and tradition with great integrity, but in a variety of different ways. Now, having said that, there will obviously be people, if the governing body were to decide that the Church in Wales would conduct same-sex marriages, who would still, because of their interpretation of Scripture, have a difficulty with that. So we would want to be satisfied that, as with the legal position in relation to the remarriage of divorcees, that those who held conscientious objections or had difficulties with such what would be for some a radical change would be protected from challenge or being coerced into conducting those marriages on that basis. And if those safeguards were in the scheme, I can't say we would do it, but I think we would be we'd be in less difficulty. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kate Green.
legislation, same-sex couples will have the choice of marriage or civil partnership.
I'm sorry, I'm a little hard of hearing.
Under the legislation, same-sex couples will have the choice of marriage or civil partnership. Opposite-sex couples, only marriage. This morning, the Secretary of State said that marriage is the gold standard. Does the Church in Wales agree with that?
I can't speak on behalf of the entire Church, but for myself, without being too anecdotal, I can tell you that I always begin, and bishops don't conduct many marriage services, but when I do conduct a marriage service, I will always make sure that in welcoming people, I make that point, that the Church and society recognises all manner of loving relationships, would want to affirm people in all manner of loving relationships, but that certainly in the present state of the law, the marriage between a man and a woman would be what you've called the gold standard. It might be an ideal to which all might want to aspire, but to which not everybody can. Nobody can achieve every ideal to which they seek to aspire. But yes, I think I'd probably agree with you.
With the Secretary of State.
I do.
Not necessarily with me.
I do apologise. I'd probably want to agree with her that it is certainly an extremely high standard that should be aspired to.
Thank you. Stephen Gilbert.
I'll take you back to the point you were just talking about, which is protections for those people who may take a different view. And if we think about people who work for the Church in Wales, do you think the bill, as it stands, offers those people sufficient protections that they won't be compelled to do something that they are strongly not happy with?
I think I'd like to pass that one either to Charles Anderson or to John.
It's very difficult to look ahead to something which at the moment is hypothetical and say that it will or will not cover a situation which has yet to arise. The legislation as at present drafted does try to address a number of possibilities. We are aware of concerns which have been addressed in our other organisations that there could be possible difficulties. But the Church in Wales as a body has always tried to find a way of accommodating people who have particular problems with any particular set of circumstances.
Bradshaw.
Bishop, do you think that the clarity of the churches, both yours, the Anglicans and the Roman Catholics we heard from earlier, message on marriage has been blunted, if you like, by their opposition to civil partnerships? And what's your church's position on civil partnerships?
In relation to civil partnerships, the bench of bishops issued a statement in December 2005, which we revised in March of last year. It's quite brief, and I'll read a couple of sentences from it for you. The bishops of the Church in Wales cannot and do not wish to prevent what the law allows for church members, both lay and clerical. That's in relation to civil partnerships. And as far as we are concerned, that would be our position.
But do you allow them in church? Do you have them in church yet?
No.
Is that your intention, or are you waiting for this Pilling report as well?
We're waiting for...
Are you waiting for this Pilling? Are you involved in the Pilling report that was referred to earlier?
No, the Pilling report is Church of England.
Right.
But no decision has been taken as to whether allow registration of civil partnerships in churches. That too would need to come to the governing body of the Church in Wales.
Is it being discussed?
Decision.
What?
It hasn't been discussed yet in the governing body. A lot of preparatory work is taking place behind the scenes with our Doctrine Commission on issues of human sexuality generally.
And I think our view on it, Mr. Bradshaw, would be that a civil partnership is a civil ceremony, and that just as a civil marriage cannot take place in a religious setting, it would be a non sequitur to allow another civil ceremony to take place in a religious setting.
Good morning. You mentioned this morning about the Church affirms itself to loving relationships, and that's good news. Can you tell myself and this committee what the opinions of your churches and your parishioners are referring to in relation to the same-sex marriage and the redefinition of marriage? Are your parishioners unhappy with the changes that are proposed? Do they feel that they should go through? As someone who doesn't come from Wales, and therefore would be very keen to hear your opinion in relation to that.
First of all, I should say that we have not conducted any survey of church members, so again, one can't speak in terms of any particular statistics. All I can say personally is that since the debate in Parliament on the second reading of the bill, I have received 2 emails from people in my own diocese asking me if I would, quote, clarify my position. I have received 1 email from someone who takes a rather more conservative view. I won't exactly tell you what they suggested should happen. But the sense that I get from that is that the opposition might not be as widespread as some might think it.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Streeter. As one of the parishioners, I can say that I am in favour of it. But obviously I fully respect that the Church has to come to its own decision in due course, and obviously that's going to require a great deal of thought and prayer and reflection. But it does seem that from the comments that you've all made, that you do see this bill overall as a permissive and protective piece of legislation, that it's not compelling you to do anything that you wouldn't want to wish to do, or indeed the Church wish to do. And do you feel that perhaps that some of the other organisations that have submitted evidence or even spoken today perhaps are taking slightly the wrong tack, or?
No, you really wouldn't expect me to answer that. We place our own position before you rather than comment on
do you see it as, would I be correct in characterising your position on the bill? You see it as a permissive bill, it's got the right protections in there?
Somebody has already mentioned slavery. If one takes the Church's attitude towards that in the 19th century, if one takes the attitude of the Church towards divorce in the mid-20th century, things have moved on a great deal. And in one of the caricatures that I put before the committee at the beginning of this, I said, here come the Christians, they must be against something. Constantly, we are interpreting Scripture. Constantly, we are keeping under review the traditions of the Church alluded to earlier on. Goodness knows what happened in 4th century Rome, I don't know, but what the patristic fathers said is again something which is being reinterpreted. And I mean, it goes without saying that one of the greatest reinterpreters of the law was Jesus himself, who placed women on a much higher pedestal than the Torah did, who went out of his way to mix with those that others considered beyond the pale or unclean. So I think what I would want to say is that the Church in Wales would want to be helpful in progressing a discussion, but would not want to see itself painted into a corner when it has to do something which it doesn't feel appropriate at a particular moment in time.
Mr. Shirley, did you want to come in there?
The bill has developed a long way in the last 6 weeks. At the time of the Minister's statement in December, there seemed to be a significant unclarity about the position of the Church in Wales. So an awful lot of energy has gone into making sure that the bill contains the procedures that we wish to see there to enable the Church in Wales to make its own decisions. Our focus has been very much on that in the last few weeks rather than on the principles underlying the bill itself.
Thank you. Jane Ellison.
I envy your inbox with only the 3 emails.
Mine have been in Bruges for 4 days. So.
I've been quite surprised by the level of concentration on issues of the inconsistencies or apparent inconsistencies around the definition of adultery and consummation. A lot of people corresponding with me seemed very bothered about those issues. I mean, do you have any comment to make about that?
I'm not entirely sure that I do. Without wishing to seem to bypass the question, we're getting to a very technical area. I mean, in terms of the reforms of divorce law, the level of evidence that used to be required for adultery, man with a trilby leaping out of the cupboard with a camera, basically, that all changed. Quite how you deal with specific matters of proof, I think, is detail that I wouldn't wish to go into unless anybody else wishes to.
I think that sort of answers the question, actually. Thank you.
Very, very happy with that answer. Jonathan Reynolds.
In the interest of consistency, I just want to ask you a question we've asked to previous people giving evidence this morning. On the issue of the possibility that civil partnerships could be extended to heterosexual couples, there seem to be no objections from either the Catholic bishops or the Church of England this morning. Is there a view that you would like to express on the prospect?
My own personal view is that I would say it would be... I can't see personally a problem with it.
Thank you. Jim Shannon.
It's just I was almost wondering about your email. I had 1,700 people who contacted me who were against the redefinition of marriage, and only 17 for. Obviously, people took the time to express that viewpoint, and I wish to express that here. Can I ask you, what has the church looked at all at the quadruple lock, and have you sought the legal opinion whether you think it's substantial enough, and if so, do you feel that it does protect the church from either domestic or European court decisions that may go against them?
I heard the end of the evidence given by the Roman Catholic Church, and the view that they seemed to be expressing was that they didn't think there was sufficient protection. The government has indicated that it will draft legislation to ensure that there is a negligible chance of a successful legal challenge. One anxiety that we might have in that regard is because of the common law duty to marry, that our role might well be interpreted not as that of a private members club, if I can call it that, a separate private organisation, but that as maybe an arm of the state in relation to marriage. And so we would want to accept the government's assurances that the protections are sufficient. Whether we are convinced about the nature of those assurances and their strength, I'm afraid I'm not in a position to give you a definite yes or no. But we would want to ensure that those protections were sufficient.
Thank you. Chris Bryant.
I've got a technical question, which is because as much as I love the Church in Wales, I hadn't come across the governing body of the Church in Wales.
You're very lucky.
I don't even have to go to Synod either.
If this is on camera, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, it is. Listen, another bishop earlier today thought that blogging was a private matter, not publicly available. But what I wanted to ask was, because the bill refers explicitly to the governing body, and I'm not sure that the governing body is referred to anywhere else in statute. So I just wonder, because you've just changed the number of people who attend, politicians were used to make it, you count the vote, you know who's on your side, who's not, and all the rest of it. You have whipping arrangements and all the rest. If you were internally allowed to change your rules, then the Lord Chancellor might want to say, well, hang on, I don't think you've gone through the process properly.
Sorry, your point is...
So my question is, how is the governing body, its statute and all the rest of it, governed? It's not in statute law, I don't think, is it?
It would have been set up under the Welsh Church legislation at disestablishment, but it effectively, under that 1914 Welsh Church Act, the Church of Wales governs its own affairs. And so in terms of the size of the governing body, in terms of its makeup, the Church in Wales, or the governing body, decides its own size. But one thing that perhaps might be helpful to members of the committee to know is that the weighting of the membership of the governing body is that the lay people are in a majority of 2/3, clergy 1/3. And in terms of the kind of change which we might envisage the governing body having to consider, this sort of legislation, if I can call it that would go through the governing body, would follow the same procedure as the Church of England and indeed Parliament. There would be a bill, there would be a first reading, a debate on its principles, a debate on its details, and so on.
But does that mean then a 2/3 majority in all three houses?
Yes, it does.
And you can't change the number of members of the houses?
Well, you can never get away from the weighting. 1/3, 2/3.
Thank you.
Clerics, lay.
Thank you, Raj. We have two questions left for this set, which is David Burrows and finally Kate Green. David.
Yes, and apologies if this
morning.
It's been raised before when I wasn't here, but do you see any impact upon teachers in church schools in Wales in relation to same-sex marriage?
Well, in relation to church schools in Wales, there are a significant number, and the legal position, as I understand it, is that in terms of the teaching delivered in those schools, and in particular in relation to religious education, which would encompass a broad spectrum these days, that teaching has to be delivered in accordance with the trust deeds of the particular schools. And those trust deeds would say that the teaching should be in accordance with the doctrines and tenets of the denomination. So, if there were no change, if I can go back to the minister's mention of a gold standard, I think one would say that in terms of marriage at the present time, this is the way in which it is taught. Were there to be a change, and were the governing body to change, then I think, as is probably the case now, teaching in terms of human relationships would be dealt with across the board sensitively and kindly.
Thank you.
As I think you said earlier on this morning.
Yes, David.
Is that answer your question?
I'm not sure. I'm just asking you whether it'll be an issue for church schools.
I'm sure it would be an issue. I'm sure it would be. Quite a bit might depend upon the particular views of a parish priest in a particular parish where there might be a church school.
And just in terms of the church members, the church itself may well occupy buildings that aren't wholly owned by the church themselves, but may well be under the governance or ownership of a local authority, public buildings. In those circumstances, in those activities, do you see any impact on any public sector equality duty arising from this bill?
I'm tempted to quote Father Ted and say that would be an ecumenical question, but it's a legal question, which
Mr. Anderson, a succinct answer, Mr. Anderson, from you.
We like Church Wales.
I think I can only say that we are aware of concerns which have been expressed around this sort of subject and certain other areas, and we are sympathetic to those concerns. And if the legislation was clarified to make it easier to handle those, then I think it would be helpful.
Thank you. Final question to Kate Green.
Could I return to adultery? I'm one of the atheists on the committee, but I think I'm right, it's forbidden under the Ten Commandments. Given that the legislation, and indeed the position now, is that adultery can only take place between two people of opposite sex, but this will create one more anomaly in relation to same-sex marriages when this legislation passes. What would the attitude of the Church in Wales be if the concept of adultery were just removed from law altogether and ceased to be seen as a ground for divorce?
And ceased to be a ground for divorce? I don't think we would be happy with that.
Okay.
Because the sanctity of a married union is something which is fractured and ruptured and broken by an act of adultery. Don't mean to say it's unforgivable.
Thank you very much. Yes.
We asked Reverend Davies where his church is and what time the services are.
I'll ask my secretary to send you my diary.
Perhaps copy it into all of the committee. Thank you very much for your excellent evidence, which was both informative and entertaining. Thank you very much.
Well, can I say thank you for your invitation?
Thank you. And now, colleagues, we look forward to our other witnesses this morning. Now, colleagues, serious business.
Very much doubt, Mr. Chairman, you can provide.
I'm very relieved to hear it.
We are mere lawyers. Mere lawyers.
Very relieved to hear it. Well, we have 27 minutes now of pure gold with our two final witnesses of the morning. Would you kindly, though you are well known, kindly introduce yourselves for the record?
I'm Helena Kennedy. I'm a Queen's Counsel practicing at the bar, and a deal of my practice is in the area of human rights. a member of the House of Lords and the principal of Mansfield College, Oxford.
Thank you.
I'm David Panick, Queen's Counsel, practising barrister, public law, crossbencher in the House of Lords.
Thank you very much. There's a question, Chris Bryant.
Just a very simple one, really. Some people have worried that the European Court of Human Rights, though some people have inadvertently called it the European Court and got themselves in a terrible mess with the European Union and so on, all the rest of it, but some have alleged that the European Court of Human Rights would immediately, if this bill were to go through as is, that the European Court would want to determine that people could sue the Church of England successfully, or the Roman Catholic Church or others, to force them to perform a same-sex marriage. Do you just want to... You've written to us and I've read that advice, but maybe you'd just like to read it into the record, as it were.
Well, David could probably do it more effectively than I could, in that my own areas of human rights are much more directed towards criminal law. But I really take a strong view that the margin of appreciation would be used when you look at the case law that does exist respecting religion and Article 9 on faith. I just don't believe that the court would in any way entertain any kind of challenge to this legislation. And I know that the previous witnesses have taken issue with this view and said that but this is the position just now, and who's to say that it won't change? But that's the nature of law. You know, I mean, you can't guarantee that circumstances in 20 years or 40 years' time are not going to involve an evolution of law. But absolutely, at this moment in time, it's very, very clear that the idea that there should be some kind of opt-in, I think, would have the support of the court in saying that this was an appropriate balance to be struck between respective rights. That would be the position, certainly just now, in my view.
Lord Panick?
Yeah, well, I agree with that. If I had a client who came to me and said, I want to bring a case of this sort, I would tell them in clear terms, this is absolutely hopeless, and it will be hopeless in 10 years' time as well. Let me briefly explain why. The reason why it would be hopeless is because the complaint would have to be not that I am unable, as a member of a same-sex couple, to get married in England and Wales, because I would, under this bill, be able to get married with all the benefits and advantages that marriage brings. What I would not be able to do, and therefore what I would have to be complaining about, is that I could not have a religious marriage. I could not have a marriage according to the rites of my religion, which had chosen not to opt in. And it is completely inconceivable that the European Court would tell a religious body how to conduct a religious practice in circumstances where there is no detriment to the individual other than a religious detriment. Of course, the court may interfere in relation to matters that have a religious dimension. We can all think of them, contraception, abortion, whatever. But this is a context where the complaint is I cannot get a religious advantage. And that is something that the court, from all its jurisprudence, refuses to enter into for very obvious reasons.
But a civil partnership would only be available to a same-sex couple. Do you think it should be extended to opposite-sex couples, to heterosexual couples? And might there be a challenge there?
Well, I think that there might be a challenge there, and I actually take the view that it should be available to same-sex couples and heterosexual couples. I have no problem with that, you see.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I as a matter of policy, I can see the advantages in extending civil partnership to same-sex couples. I would be doubtful that a complaint would succeed in Strasbourg even on that basis, that an opposite-sex couple cannot enter into a civil partnership. The government would say, and I think would succeed in the argument, that civil partnerships were created in order to address a particular problem at a particular time.
Thank you. David Burrows.
We go beyond the church ceremony in terms of people's expression of their faith. How, in terms of your wide experience in relation to, in terms of human rights and religious liberty, in terms of the manifestation of faith issue, which has been raised in recent court judgments, do you see any implications flowing from this bill in terms of people manifesting their faith, in terms of expressing it at the workplace, in schools, in those areas?
No, I think that this bill raises very different issues. As you mentioned, as you obviously know, there are difficult cases where issues have to be addressed as to the extent to which someone's wish to exercise their right to manifest their religion may conflict with other public policy concerns. I think the only context in this bill where that may arise would be in the context of the registrar. Yeah. And as you know, Ms. Liddell, the registrar, failed in her complaint in the Court of Appeal. She failed in the European Court when she said, I have a religious objection to being involved in a civil partnership, registering a civil partnership. Now, were a future Miss Liddell to say, I am a marriage registrar and I have a religious objection to being involved in a same-sex marriage, she would fail for the same reason. And the reason she would fail is because if you want to perform the public function of being a marriage registrar, you really can't say, I'm not prepared to marry people who are marrying according to the law of the land in a civil marriage ceremony, nothing to do with a religious function.
Speaker, what about the situation for effectively registrars in non-conformist churches who receive the license to conduct marriages? And do you see any issues that a local authority with an equality policy and equality duty would seek to take away that licence from such a registrar who doesn't want to perform same-sex marriages?
He's not preferred, he or she's not prepared to perform a religious marriage. That's the context in which the question is being put to me, is it? Because if it's a religious marriage, then I would take the view that the local authority would have no power whatsoever to penalise the individual for refusing to participate in a religious marriage ceremony of a same-sex couple.
Thank you. Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Chair. Lord Panic, I read your submission with great interest, and I don't know if you were here earlier on, but your chamber colleague, Professor McCrudden, who hadn't read your submission, was raising a number of serious legal objections.
I wasn't. I don't have that advantage. I'm sorry.
But I was wondering what you make of those who are attempting to use legal argumentation to oppose the bill, and particularly the arguments being put forward by the Catholic Church, because he did go into some quite detail, and I'm not in a position to question some of it. I was wondering what you made of.
No. Well, I've read this morning the Catholic Bishop's submission. I respectfully take issue with them. I think the points that they raise are not based on real legal concerns. There may well be policy objections to this bill. I'm not commenting on that, but I do say there's no legal basis for concern that the consequence of this bill, if enacted, would be to cause difficulties other than for the marriage registrar in the circumstances that I mentioned. I can't see that it's realistic to think that the legal difficulties they raise are going to occur. I mean, they are concerned, as I understand it, about the human rights implications, that the person, particularly in the Church of England, who may be marrying is performing a public function, and therefore the Human Rights Act would apply. I think that is extremely unlikely insofar as they are performing a religious function, and in any event, for the reasons I've already given, it is not a breach of human rights for a person to refuse a religious marriage on religious grounds. So I don't agree with their concerns, and I don't think they say that a court would uphold their concerns. They're expressing the fact that there are fears, but one can always devise fears in this area. I've said, perhaps flippantly, that the possibility of a court upholding these concerns is on the level of the Red Sea parting. I mean, it is not a realistic concern that is going to occur in real life, I'm afraid.
I do want people to know that this, of course, has been a source of great debate in circles of human rights lawyers. And so, you know, while you might find it surprising, actually is what they're talking about in the pubs in Fleet Street and in the wine bars. And all I can tell you is that by and large, the general view is that this is about an unease with a policy issue rather than a very serious legal debate of substance. Most people feel that in drafting this bill in the way that it has been drafted, real protections have been created for religion and for those who would find it conscientiously objectionable to participate and to be involved in such a marriage ceremony.
I mean, there are a number of protections, as you know, written into the bill. I would find it very difficult, if asked, to draft anything that would improve on the legal protections contained in the bill. Policy issues are an entirely different question.
Thank you very much. Jane Ellison.
Just a quick on Mr. Doherty's point. As I understood Professor McCrudden's argument, it was that he thought it might be challengeable that the actual nature of the Catholic Church not opting in was challengeable as essentially sort of discriminatory. I think that was the broad thrust of it all. It was quite complex.
Yeah, but again, my answer would be that any complainant who is a member of the Catholic Church who says, I wish to enter into a same-sex marriage, I'm not able to do so under Catholic doctrine, the answer to them would be, you are perfectly entitled under English law now to have a marriage. What you're not entitled to have is a marriage under Catholic doctrine, but that is purely a religious matter, and no court is going to interfere with the way in which the Catholic Church organises its own doctrines when it has no implications for no adverse implications for the individual other than religious implications.
I mean, can I just say that David articulates it better than anybody, but where I think we've got to all be in agreement is that this is not to say that there won't be attempts made to mount legal actions. I suspect that there will be, but the view that's solidly held is that they would not be successful, and that if you were really giving advice behind the closed doors of your chambers, you'd be saying you're not likely to win. That in fact, you're very unlikely to win.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Jim Shannon.
I'm quite intrigued, Lord Panic, with your analogy of it. It would require a legal miracle much greater than the parting of the Red Sea for the children of Israel to cross from Egypt. Moses, with the divine intervention of God, of course, was able to part the Red Sea and make it happen. I'm ever mindful of the terminologies. Doctors differ and patients die. In relation to lawyers have different opinion as well, but hopefully nobody dies as a result of any of those decisions that lawyers would make. The question I want to ask Mr. Streeter is this, because I know you're looking at me objectively, so I want to make sure I get the question in. I was at a meeting last week where there was 3 human rights lawyers who gave an opinion, and obviously the questions were coming from the floor the day after the change or the second reading of the bill in the House of Commons. Every one of those give two of those give a different opinion from yourself, and you'll be aware, of course, that Aidan O'Neill QC, obviously very eminent as well, has given a different opinion as well. Yes. Why should we believe, with respect, your opinion as against all those other people who say something completely different?
Well,
I'd be intrigued to hear your answer.
No, I can only give you my opinion.
Yeah.
You must make a judgment on the quality of the arguments that you've heard. Yeah. I've looked at Aidan O'Neill's opinion. He raises a number of possibilities as to success of legal action. I don't think even he suggests that any of these possibilities would result in adverse legal decisions. And I've attempted in the notes that I sent to the committee to explain why, in my opinion, none of those concerns are justified. And as Helena said, I like to think, and Helena likes to think, that the views that we are expressing are the mainstream views of lawyers. Now, miracles can happen. I'm not suggesting to you it is logically impossible.
I believe in miracles, by the way.
Well, fine. Yeah. But I have to tell you, from all my experience over many years of arguing human rights cases, the points that have been raised are absolute certain losses. I mean, you would get nowhere in a domestic court or in the European court. You would get nowhere in the domestic courts because the bill sets out with absolute clarity a number of protections, and you get nowhere in the European court for the reasons I've explained. It's up to you whether you accept that, and I entirely understand that others have expressed different views, but I can only respond to what I understand to be the reasons why they've given those opinions, and I, for my part, find them wholly unconvincing.
I would also say to Mr. Shannon that the courts are not known for miracles. And all I can tell you is that where I've had miracles, they've usually involved juries and not judges.
Thank you very much. Tim Loughton.
I entirely see the distinction you're making about a religious detriment, why that could be a defence for holding that ceremony within a church. The confusion and the grey area comes where a church collides with a public sector, as it were. And if one takes the scenario, and if we had time, I'd want to explore two of those European Court judgments around the registrar and the relate counsellor, which I think illustrate this. But if one takes the example of a church which uses a school or a town hall for its services, as many do that don't have their own churches, that church very clearly advertises itself as not holding same-sex marriages. What would the legal position be of the council, the school, whatever it might be, in saying you can no longer use those public premises in order to hold your church activities because you don't agree with same-sex marriage under the public sector equality duty?
Yeah, well, I think if the council or the school were to be so ill-advised as to seek to penalise the religious body and to penalise it only because it was acting in accordance with the law of the land and declining to solemnise same-sex marriages on its premises, and acting in accordance with the rights which I'm suggesting would be upheld by the European Court of Human Rights under Article 9 as to religious beliefs and manifestation of beliefs, I have no doubt whatsoever that any court would say that the school or the local authority were acting unlawfully in so penalising the religious body.
I agree entirely.
And in the example I tried to raise with the Education Secretary earlier, which he didn't answer, where a teacher declines to recognise or treat on an equal basis, for whatever basis, when teaching religious education or sex education, that when challenged by a child saying, "Miss, what do you think about same-sex marriage?" could not say it's